Anybody in the waiting room there?
Perfect, thank you.
9 o'clock on Wednesday. Only Wednesday. Yeah.
Betsy, he is on.
Okay.
Now I'll make him a panelist.
All right, are we ready?
You're on.
Okay, it is 9:02 and we are here for the planning meeting regarding Title 11. With that, we'll turn it over to Director Gabel.
Morning, Commissioners. This was born out of the update meeting when you guys wanted to have a workshop specifically for the proposed changes in Title 11 and Title 12. The Title 12 meeting, I think, is set for next Wednesday. I don't recall the exact time. I want to say it's in the first half today, but the agenda's been published for that as well. So we have the entirety of Title 11 here. There's numerous changes throughout. Some of them is just some redundant statements, and some other things, it's some rationale behind some frustrations we've had or that landowners have had in developing their land. So I have Katie here. She has a microphone, so that's great, because she deals with or manages the group that are processing all these types of permits, so she can give you more specific scenarios as to some of the rationale behind some of these requested changes. There's also some changes in here where it's just highlighted, we want your input on it before crafting any language. So some of this is going to be some debate and back and forth, and the expectation behind the end of this meeting is that we have a completed draft, or at least a 90%, and then staff will go and complete the remainder and then present this either at a public hearing in the future or at a business meeting, depending on what the board wants in that kind of direction. So that being said, let's kind of jump into it. So the first change is just updating the name of the Division of Building Safety for the state of Idaho. It's now been changed to the Division of Occupation or Professional Licenses. So that's just a no-brainer change. 11-103, and feel free to stop me if any of you have questions on any of this.
Yeah, because
So-
I thought we were going line by line, so
Yeah,
show me
page by page.
show me, because I looked at from top to bottom.
Okay.
Not just your suggested changes, because on building location permits, I wanted to have a little bit of a discussion
Okay,
on that
we
section.
can just start there. So we'll start in 101. What questions do you guys have?
Nothing on 101.
So on, not on the kind of the, sorry, she's blowing air in the building and it's changing my breathing stuff,
yeah.
so I'm struggling a little bit. Building location permits, I've received a lot of comments on us doing this. And some of the questions that get asked are the 2-year limit on, the whole point of the location is just the location of it, and the construction of the location takes longer than 2 years, why are we having them have to apply for a new one or pay additional fees when the location didn't change? If we're calling it a building location permit, it's just the location of the building. And some of the feedback is it feels like that it's not really a building location permit, because barring that if nothing changed, because the point was the location of the structure, and we've confirmed that it's on their property and it's met all the setbacks, and we've done that with the original. Why do we go farther to say, you're not done in 2 years, pay us again, even though the location didn't change? Some people have asked that we change that because it feels like when we ask them to come back for another location permit, that it's not fair.
Yep. And we have some drafted changes to address a lot of those concerns later on when it talks about the how long a permit is good for. We also have a practice that the planning the planning department's been utilizing for some time that's not codified in code, and we want some input from the board on how you want to codify that or add it to. So I think we're trying to resolve some of those concerns because we've heard them as well.
So let me ask the board then, do you want to let him go through his presentation and then we go back because I don't want to ask questions that you have anticipated and have an answer for
Okay.
unnecessarily.
Okay.
I would prefer to go chapter by chapter, and that way we all can address any changes that Jake might have or any suggestions that we might have. That way we can kind of stay in order instead of jumping back and forth.
Either or. I know
Because I have
Commissioner
questions
Corn
on the
had-
building location permits and stuff too. But
Okay.
I do have a question on 11-102A. So maybe we could be a little more organized if we just go in order.
Okay.
I'm agreeable.
Okay. So any other questions on 101 or 101.1?
No.
Okay. 102, this is the manufactured structure. So this is placement of manufactured structures. I know Commissioner Corn, I think you had some questions on ensuring
Yes.
this is more dwellings than just
Correct.
any manufactured structure.
Because the way it's worded, it includes sheds and outbuildings, anything else that is already pre-manufactured that I could buy at Ziggy's or Home Depot or anything like that. So I would like the wording to reflect that it's manufactured homes or dwellings or whatever.
So can we go, so what you're recommending is on A where it just says manufactured structure?
Right. That would include things that I buy at Home Depot,
So
which should
I
not,
think if we consider that in light of other sections of the code with regard to when a structure is considered exempt, such as a storage building under 400 square feet, things of that nature, it will be addressed by that aspect of the code. Director, do you have a different understanding?
I get Commissioner Corn's point of view where we could just be more specific that this code section specifically applies to dwellings, and it does. That's the only time we've ever utilized this is when we're looking at manufactured dwellings. So we could add dwelling in there in a couple of places, and I think it would clarify and so. But you're correct, Commissioner Domke, that it is addressed under the definition of structure in a couple other places that are exempt. But I think adding some specificity would be fine.
I think I agree with Commissioner Corn that it should say manufactured dwelling, because we have storage sheds that,
Exactly.
and so I think that that's something that provides clarity at the beginning, and if it said dwelling, it will capture the tiny home kind of thing that.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
if the only intent is for dwellings to be covered by this section, then I agree.
okay, so I've added that both in the title of 102, 11-102, and then in A. I think that's the only place, but I can double check to make sure that we don't need to add it any other place. Okay.
Can I ask a question on
Sure.
B, if we're done with part A? And I'm gonna agree, I have some ignorance on these type of homes, but should this mobile homes include manufactured homes? I thought there is a difference between the two, that there's a specificity of, there's two different definitions of those. And so if it's to address dwellings, why not change that to manufactured dwelling as well? And then it's generic enough to capture both of those terms that are in the lexicon. Would that make sense?
I'm gonna speculate, which sometimes is not good, but I think prior to 76, there weren't any manufactured homes. Manufactured homes came in at a later time.
Yeah.
So mobile homes was the only thing that was in existence
Yeah,
at that time. That's the only thing that I can see.
So mobile homes were pre-June 15th, 1976, and there's some state standards regarding mobile homes and manufactured homes, and I think that's where this code came from. I haven't done a dive into this subject Someone did a presentation on this. And I
It
think
was Lynn Scott.
Yeah,
Lynn Scott did a presentation on this when we were talking about something related to vacation homes and how people built them. And so this might be what Commissioner Korn said. I just, in consistency under manufactured dwelling, I wasn't sure if it should just say manufactured dwelling, but if you're saying the other one didn't exist before, that doesn't mean people don't, I don't know if that should be. That's just what caught my eye of,
yeah.
if
Yeah.
there's two different ones.
Exactly.
But
Yeah,
if you're
'cause
saying
there's-
it didn't exist.
There's
then-
mobile homes and manufactured homes, and there's a date cutoff, and there's some specific requirements, and that's where I think these standards come from
Okay.
for under B. And the assessor gets involved with those, because I think they're assessed differently, or how they're permitted through the assessor's office is different as well. Is that right? Don't we, it's a little bit different than normal building location permits.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Okay.
as far as what the assessor does.
Yeah, because I think, like, they have to get something like a VIN inspection on manufactured homes. I think it's permitted through the DMV, if I remember right. And that's the
Right, and then
rationale
it
behind
becomes real property.
Yeah,
And if it gets sold, then, I know I get notified from the treasurer's office when a mobile home gets moved from a property.
yeah.
Because they get to title it through DMV to
Exactly.
circumvent.
Yeah.
And so that's, okay.
So I can validate some of that information before I bring this back for any kind of adoption. If a change needs to be made, and I'll double check with the assessor's office to ensure that our dates and the types there are correct. Okay, anything else on 102?
I don't have anything.
So as I previously mentioned, we're just updating the name of the new state organization because it was combined under DOPL, the Division of Occupation Professional Licenses. I thought it was permitting and licenses, so I have it wrong in my head.
Yeah, I don't
It's
think so.
professional licenses, you're right.
Just rolls off the tongue.
Somehow this was copy pasted. I'm not sure why, so it's redundant. 103. So you have the intro to it, and then it should be A and B. And A is copied in there twice, essentially. So that really doesn't. Any other changes or questions on 103?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. Moving into small structures. So right now, and I'll give you a little bit of history behind small structures. We used to have something called an exempt structure permit, and then back in 22,
21.
The board said the exempt structures or anything under 1,000 square feet, right? They would still be required to apply for a permit, but the permit cost was zero, and it caused some staff work on our side. So we took it back to the board saying we were getting X number of these exempt permits per year. We had, and I think Mr. Allerton, my predecessor, came up with this idea for a small structure, which is non-habitable, no plumbing. It's more or less your outbuilding at 1,080 square feet. So they increase it from 1,000 to 80, and then the cost of these are
$230.
$230.
Total.
And I think we've even reduced that cost. I think it was $330 before, and we reduced it
Yeah.
in 2 years ago. So it's just a small structure permit. So it can't be used for anything habitable. You can't have an RV and living in it parked inside or anything like that. It's just your outbuilding or shop. So I think the 1,080 came from some kind of dimensional standard, and I have not, because Commissioner Korn asked me about like where did that come from. I remember it was some size of the building came to 1,080, but we tried like 5 different calculations on math, and I still don't know how the 1,080 came
Yeah.
up. So.
Yeah. I would like to suggest to the board that we change it to an accessory building with no size limit. As long as it still meets all these other requirements, no plumbing and everything else. I'm not sure why we're limiting it to a certain size. That's my question.
In terms of a lower permit fee?
Yes.
I will tell you, community-wise, and there's a financial aspect to the county, but I know the community feels like they should not have to pay building location permits for everything that they put on their property, because property owners are so heavily responsible for carrying a lot of the fees in the county. And I don't disagree because I feel kind of the same, that everything you do on your property, you're getting taxed. I was just talking with the director Top about that. So what are your thoughts on that, Director Gabel?
I think Katie and I had a discussion about this idea. So I should, for full transparency, Commissioner Corn and I sat down and went through this. He had a whole lot of questions after the meeting last week. So I think last Friday or Thursday, we sat down for an hour and a half and reviewed a lot of it. So if it seems like I know a lot of what's on his mind, because we had a long meeting about this already. That being said, we had a discussion regarding small structures versus accessory structures. The amount of time it takes by staff is nominal. The difference there, I don't think we could define. So having a cheaper permit for any size accessory structure, I think is fine. The board just needs to be cognizant of the fact that we're regulating not just the location, but location and use of a structure. So if somebody builds an accessory structure and it looks like a mini storage, and later we find out it's a mini storage, we're going to go back and tell them they need to get a change of use permit and turn that into a commercial use. So we have had some very unique applications where it sure looks like one thing, but they're claiming it's something else. So we have kind of a back and forth. So I think it's fine to update that and modify even to the square footage size, but people will build, I mean, yeah.
I think, oh, sorry.
Yeah, me too. I just think that those deceitful people will always be deceitful, no matter how good we try and word things. But on the other hand, we shouldn't punish the good people.
Sure.
Someone that wants to build a hay barn and it's over 1,068 or 86 feet, whatever that is, they shouldn't be punished for the guy that's going to look for the loophole, no matter what we do.
I think also it's a building location permit. If we need to address the use aspect, it's not titled as that. This is just, as a taxpayer, I see building location permit is the work that the county must do to confirm that my building is correctly seated on my property. Not that the enforcement of what your use is a different aspect, but not the location. So I tend to agree with Commissioner Corn that I shouldn't have a restriction. All you're doing is confirming where my location of my building is, and the size element shouldn't matter. And yes, I think that people are going to abuse the system, but I think you might get also greater compliance for people that are putting structures on if it's not that we're charging them. Because some people put their RV park to just park their RV under, and they're, depending on the size of that, we're saying $400 something just to protect something that they invested. I tend to agree that I feel over permitted. So I agree with, doesn't matter the size if we still need to collect a fee.
So I think it'd be appropriate to make this residential accessory structures. And that would solve my concern, because when we do get permits, there's a lot of permitted uses for commercial and industrial and other aspects that the only time to review the use or the proposed use is at the building location permit phase. And there's a lot of standards from Title 12 that have to be met on commercial uses within a building location permit. So we do a pretty in-depth review, and there's a lot of there are permitted accessory structures in the commercial use table. So I think if we carve this out as a residential accessory building, then it gives us the opportunity to do a more thorough review on the commercial uses.
Well, and I think that's I think in part of what we need to do is not use building location permit to address other issues. And so the other issues is what you're trying to capture. And outside, I think that in the code, when you're building on one piece, if I recall just using my example, we get to build the one main house, and then you get to build another structure, but if you're going to use it as residential, there is a size restriction on how large that can be. And I only read it when I was building, so it was like 900 square feet of that other living structure. You're trying to capture that to make sure if that's being used as a residence and people paying taxes. But for a building location permit, I think structures that are not inhabited with no plumbing should have it the way Commissioner Korn said it, and then maybe you add the residential piece to it as a separate to capture people that are using it. Does that make sense?
I think you're addressing two different issues.
Right, that's what I'm saying, that's correct. I'm saying it's segregated out because part of this management was to, like you said, to capture the people that are using the buildings regardless of the size, and they're really using it for something other than what is just a structure that they got the BLP for that just said, I'm just storing stuff in it.
But I think the concern would be if it's not associated with a dwelling, if it does have some commercial or other use, then there are other design standards and things that would apply that need to be accounted for.
Absolutely.
Right, and so if you just said, pay your $230 for your building location permit for that structure, there's no size restriction and that's it.
So maybe I'll give you a scenario that to kind of help clarify my point of view on this. Say you have a golf course, and then on the golf course, they want to put in a storage building to store their tractors and other maintenance equipment. With that is a commercial use associated with the golf course, right? Whenever someone applies for that, the only time we have to review it, it's going to be a permitted use in that zone, is at the building location permit application. There's no other conditional use permit or anything else that we're going to have an opportunity to review that for landscape standards, signage standards, lighting standards, stormwater erosion control standards, and so forth. So if you allow any accessory structure to essentially circumvent that or at a lesser fee, it's a lot of burden on staff to review those commercial uses in a simple application. So does that make sense?
It does make sense, but when someone comes in with it saying, I want to do it on the golf course, and you know that it's commercial, then you would just use a different, I'm saying that they're two different.
That's what I'm getting at, is if we change this to residential accessory structures, then it negates my entire concern about a commercial use or an industrial use. Because then we're going to have the opportunity to say, you're not qualified for this, you have to go to a different building location permit that's more costly, but it's going to give us the opportunity to provide to require all of those other standards of review.
And if it was termed the residential, then it could stay at just a flat without a restriction on size.
Absolutely.
So I'm agreeable to that.
So the only question I have, Jake, is, so we have higher standards for commercial?
Absolutely.
Because it's public building, or why do we have that?
Because in commercial structures, they're allowed, it's more intense of a use, right? You can assume more trips per day, more use than just someone parking the tractor and getting out on the weekends, right? It's going to be in and out employees and the owners coming and going. You're going to have different types of chemicals being stored in it. You're going to have different lighting happening on the outside of the building. Commercial uses tend to be more dense, like packed in closer to each other. So the big one is a stormwater requirement. All commercial structures are required to get a stormwater, a professional stormwater plan.
Mm-hmm.
So any other details on that you want to
No,
add?
I think you covered it.
So we kind of need to divide commercial from residential.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and they're divided right now in our fee schedule
Absolutely.
and how we review them.
Okay.
So I think
So for clarity, by adding residential accessory building, that might close a loophole or something
Yeah.
if someone's,
Exactly.
or issue that we had yesterday with wording conflicting with different parts.
Okay, so
Yeah, I'm
we
okay
want to
with that, I
remove
guess.
the size limitation, but you're fine with the other limitations in there so long as just to ensure it's not being used as a dwelling, but then make that a specific for residentials. Okay. We have this as redundant, so the last portion,
Oh, I think that it's
Okay.
covered in expiration and abandonment.
so D is covered in expiration and abandonment, and rather than having it stated several times throughout the code, I'd rather have an expiration and abandonment code that we refer to. So we'll get to that here in a few.
Can I ask on point 5, an open shell
Point 5.
structure, open shell lean-to addition or open shell deck addition to a residential or residential accessory structure that do not exceed 1,080 square feet. Why did we get a number on that one?
A small structure is limited to 1,080 square feet right now.
So when we do the change, we would remove that one as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
That whole
Sorry,
section.
I was going line by line. Thank you.
So then we
Yeah.
got to do that to 4 too, but I'm sure
Yep.
that'll all get
Okay.
taken care
All
of.
the
Yeah.
sizing limitations, I'll update on that and
Okay.
remove.
Sorry,
You're good. Okay, anything on 105?
I'm still on D.
Oh, my
Sorry.
apologies.
The 1 year from issuance date. So that is, if we've determined and they've started, and I'll give my example. So like when I was doing construction, I don't know who it was that called what department, but we were working on our project and the person just said, you've got to show me that you guys actually started the project based on that foot plan. And so I actually just texted the person the information. If the person started the structure, and I know that it's only 230, they're being given only 1 year to complete it.
No, only 1 year to start construction. As of right now.
And we're actually, so in this, I have a comment saying refer back, or this is redundant to BCRC 11-122, which is our expiration. We're proposing a change to that to
Okay.
2 years and start a construction. And like I said, this is a removal, so we're not being redundant throughout the code.
Right,
But
okay.
we'll talk about that expiration stuff, and we have some, I think, some lightening up the load, if you will, provisions.
I will
we'd like to
pause on expiration because that's where I'm getting a
I
lot
can
of
tell,
people.
you're focused on it.
So
Right.
many
Okay.
people call me
I-
about why does it expire, nothing actually changed. So that,
Agreed.
I'll leave that there and you know that's
Okay,
You're not alone.
okay.
the phone calls. I just-
You want to move on to 105?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, any changes or questions on 105? We don't have any proposed changes there.
Just a question on B, if you could explain that. So if someone is wanting to build something in a mapped floodplain or floodway, we're going to require them to get an Idaho registered engineer or Idaho licensed architect. So is that how Title 14 and all your other ordinances here, is that what all that says?
Yeah, so Title 14 is your floodplain development chapter, or title, and there are some specific requirements that came out of FEMA for that, and we're implementing their requirements. So some of those we have a little bit of control over, but most of them are just directed to us by the feds. So-
Okay.
And I know Jason manages most of the floodplain. I have one other certified floodplain manager now who's kind of taken some of the reviews from him. But he has 8 or 10 years experience in doing floodplain management. So he has some revisions to Title 14 that once we get it approved by the state floodplain manager, I'll bring before the board and give you some rationale. But we try to keep up to date with what FEMA's requiring, and then anytime we can add lenience, we do. But that code is just referring back saying, just in case you didn't know, and if you are in the floodplain, you are going to be required to get floodplain permits, so.
All right.
Can I ask you on D, the waiver that the board may waive political subdivisions or public agencies?
D
I'm-
of what section?
108.
Oh, did I skip down? I thought you were.
We were on 105.
You're at 105.
What is
We're
it,
good.
105 to
Overachiever.
108?
Well, no, I thought you were done.
I was done.
Good catch, Jake.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to make a note because I just noticed it goes from 105 to 108. Looks like they removed some stuff and didn't update the numbering. Anyways, okay, 108. So fees.
The waiver, the board may waive aspect of it. I've never seen that come. How do we decide that?
So it's, the fee schedule actually sets that out. So when, in the past, whenever the
Okay.
board adopts the fee schedule, it says we're waiving for political subdivisions. So we're actually, in this, proposing a change that says no fee shall be assessed for political subdivisions or public agencies. Actual cost of professional services and application noticing or publishing still apply, which is what
What?
this fee schedule has said for the last 5 years. We're just codifying that.
Can I ask why? Because Sandpoint charged us.
It's been a long standing, so if a school district, a water district comes in, we just haven't charged those fees. If you would like to, we can make that change, but we were just copying this essentially out of the adopted fee schedules, so.
Can the board have this discussion? Because When we apply for the stuff with the city of Sandpoint, they charge us their fees. And why are we not charging fees? They already get a tax break because they don't have to pay taxes.
You know, I think the ambulance district, in my mind, is a great example right now. These are all separate taxing districts and separate entities that have to balance their own budgets. And so, in my mind, we should be charging the same fee across the board, no matter what entity it is, private or public.
I think that the work still has to be done by planning. So I'm not for saying political subdivisions don't have to pay, but that the taxpayers do.
I agree with you.
Commissioner Corn?
And I am failing to see why we wouldn't charge them, I guess, to look at the other side of the coin.
Does that also apply to internal departments? Like solid waste requires to get a conditional use permit on any new facility that they're going to put in place. Would you want to waive any of those fees or?
I would
charge?
waive it for our stuff,
Okay.
but not for external. And there's a reason to waive it internally, but what are your
I
guys'
agree.
thoughts?
I
Okay.
agree.
Yeah, I think when it's another taxing entity, another municipality, they have an obligation to manage their budget and we have an obligation to manage ours. And so if we have costs, we need to cover those costs.
Okay.
And when the newspaper writes it, it's not that it's fair to the taxpayer that we all pay our share. And whenever someone doesn't pay, it's not free. It pushes more on the other person. So there's our equitable, and then we balanced our budget on the 230 drop on no matter the size by everybody paying.
Okay.
And people can say, thank you, Mayor Grimm, because they charge us.
Okay. Anything else on 108?
I don't have anything.
Can I, not on changes, but your process by which you reduce the fines, do you guys have a process that is very clear cut? Because it says that that's a power given to you?
So I require like a narrative write-up from anyone that's going to request any reduction in fees or fines. And it is a discretionary call. It's really hard to put that into code as to how you're going to evaluate or what you're going to require because each one of those scenarios is very different. I don't do that on a whim. It is, Katie and I discuss it pretty often. Can you think of a couple scenarios maybe to kind of express to the board? I know it could be that
They didn't receive they were out of town and they didn't receive their courtesy notice for their building violation. And then I sent them a certified, and when I send them a certified, a building violation fee applies at that point. At that point, they'll ask when they apply for a building location permit, if we can waive that violation fee. And then at that point, then I have them email Jake, and then we'll have a discussion about it. And
Can I ask this, because we do this on taxes, and part of my mindset when we have fees and penalties is that we're consistent across the organization on how does someone achieve that. And so when people tell us that example on their tax notice and they're out of towners, the position of the boards have been, it's taxes. And so why do we give waivers when people violate the building location when the code says it must be obtained before you do it? And so it's not one violation really. It's you started without the permit and then I had to tell you to pay and you didn't get the mail and then you didn't pay. So it's not a one-time thing. And the reason I say that is in part what you guys are trying to do is get compliance from the beginning, which will reduce our overall of non-compliance and having to go to bill to put liens on, which increases issues in the county. Why waive unless they followed the actual hardship that allows waivers when we go through like our taxes, when people can ask for a hardship to not pay that penalty? That's actually a specific form that meets a financial or emergency position that is very specific versus I didn't get my mail, I was out of town, so that we have consistency.
Right, but I mean, that was just an example. Jake rarely waives violation fees. If he does, it's gonna be like cut in half. And are you saying that you want us to just, instead of just sending a courtesy notice, you would like us to start just hitting people with violation fees
No.
with that first letter, even if they
It's-
come back and,
That's not where I'm asking the question.
Okay.
It's, you said you send a courtesy, then you send a certified that has a fee attached to it, and then that person calls you guys for a reduction of the violation penalty and just to do the permit that they didn't do originally, right? And I'm saying, once you had to take the next steps, which, why are we waiving the violation aspect of it? Because that's different than the way we process when people don't do their taxes timely. And I guess that's where I was wanting to
Sure.
know kind of how you guys are doing that, because that
So-
doesn't come before the board.
I mean, this
Can I ask real
specifically
quick
says
where
like,
you're at?
It's,
follow.
the planning director may
So
reduce
108E.
this, but E.
so
You're
the
writing
last
small.
line there specifically says, ignorance of the law by any person should not justify such relief. So if the response I get is, I didn't know I need to, I quote that and say, sorry, like there's no waiver granted. Let's see, what else?
Can you
the-
give an example of when you, that's what I was asking, and I
been
thought
pretty
that's what
rare.
you were
Yeah.
saying, you waived for that
mean,
reason.
First off, just to require them to give me a narrative have stopped a lot of people
Yeah.
from even asking.
it's
So-
like, we've gotten 3 in the last year.
Yeah.
It's not very
So
often.
like 2 or 3 a year that people actually write it up. And it could be, our house burnt down in a fire, or we relied on a contractor to do this, and
Oh, yeah, or is the
and
contractor,
told us it was in the contract, and now we're finding out later he didn't follow through with his contract. So I think I've had one of those where,
or somebody bought the problem,
oh,
right?
yeah.
So
We
I
get
understand those. So in the
Yes.
example you first gave, that's not one where you guys are waiving.
No.
That's what
No.
I'm at, because that's
No, it's just an
inconsistent with the
example.
county.
So it's really those extreme scenarios of, we bought the problem, we then found out later.
Okay. I can
and-
understand
yeah,
that. The first
so.
one is
Sure.
where I was questioning. So thank you for the explanation.
I think we used to get like 10 or 15 a year, but after I started requiring a narrative, just people don't even want to put into their rationale why, because we give them this code section and say, how do you fit here? And if they look at that on their own and think, oh, I'm just ignorant of the law, I'm not even going to ask, I'll just pay the fee. So anyways, okay, so going on to 109, any questions on those? Or
I do.
Sure.
So I think at the very last, everything you're talking about investigation fees and stuff, I'm assuming that we're talking about paperwork or computer work or whatever, not actually going out on the property. The last sentence says a separate investigative fee shall be charged for each site visit to the subject property conducted by the Bonner County Planning Department. So my only issue there is the person is doing something wrong, granted, but he hasn't applied for a building location permit, giving the planning department or anybody else the right to come on their property. So I'm concerned about trespassing when we do not have permission to be on that property.
Sure.
That's my concern on that one.
We don't trespass. Even if it's not posted, we're not going to go on somebody's property without permission. That's just our standard process. And as far as the fee for investigation, it's not very common that we use that fee for investigation. Like, if they're in that area, I'll have them, swing by, and if they can see it from the road, then great. And if not, then a lot of time if we can't see it from the road, we'll just send like a courtesy notice. They'll call in, we'll have a discussion, and then maybe a site visit to either unfound or abate the violation if it's actually not in violation. Or we have a conversation of how they need to move forward to resolve the violation.
I can think of one scenario where somebody built an RV park on the shoreline, brought in a bunch of sand, and built a septic system without any permitting. And there was a lot of complaints. We got permission to do site visits. He claimed he had it all cleaned up, so he gave us permission to come on site. We came on site, and it wasn't cleaned up, essentially. He hadn't removed his unpermitted uses. So we charged him an investigation fee for that time. He called 2 more times, I want to say, and we went back each time before we finally unfounded and called it resolved. But we charge him investigation fees for each, because he didn't have an open building
Yeah.
location permit, and it wasn't a use he could get permitted in his zone, if I remember right. So that's been like the one major scenario where that made a lot of sense, where
Yeah.
they're not going to try to seek a remedy. They're just going to remove the use, remove the structures altogether.
So should we add somewheres in there by permission? Or is that getting to be too, I just want to be sure, and not just this board, but this is going to go on to a next board, possibly,
Sure.
with that review. So I would just like to have something in there that's saying that we're not going to trespass or by permission, or some kind of wording in there, so where it reads, because the way it reads, it says that you're gonna do a site visit to the subject property.
I mean, we're very aware of like when permission is granted. And we never, I think you and I have had this conversation, when you have a neighbor complaining about their neighbor, if one neighbor grants us permission to be on their land, we'll go up to, but never cross the property line to try to view any kind of violation.
Right.
But if the complainant doesn't want to give us permission, then we don't have a whole lot of grounds we have no grounds to be on anyone's property. So
So does that just go without saying?
I think so, but if you want to codify that, we can.
I think that this is, I think I understand what you were saying, but I think what this is not, it's not saying that they will go without permission. They're saying that there's a,
Separate fee.
well, and that the idea of conducting a site visit doesn't mean that it's a site visit without, subject to not trespassing. It's just saying that they're opening it up to say they may need a site visit, because some of these, they might just look on their little spy camera and say, I can see, so I don't need a site visit because it's in the middle of your property. I can see the footprint from the little,
Clarify,
I
it's
know.
aerial imagery. We have no spy cameras or drones.
I don't know, it's a drone and Blanchard, but no, yeah, the aerial imagery might be able to tell you, and you don't need to actually do it. But I think this is giving you a little bit of that push to the community to see that it's better that you do it first so that this doesn't have to happen. I think that's why it's worded that way. And I think the process by which a site visit is conducted is a separate issue that is kind of codified in the operational procedure of planning when this occurs.
Okay, you want to move on to
Are
110?
you satisfied with
Yeah, I'm
that?
fine with that.
Okay.
So 110 is your agency authorization. So this is who is required to sign off on before we issue a building location permit. So this is where we require sign-offs from PhD, from fire districts, from
Sewer districts.
sewer districts if they're within and hooking up to a sewer district. So, questions on this?
I had a couple. So I guess on B, on the last part where it says unless approval has been obtained from the applicable fire district and the applicable sewer district, I have a note here that says, I wrote down notify. So are we asking for approval?
Yes.
Just to be clear, and not just notified?
So we have like a memo that the fire district or sewer district would sign saying this has been approved, and it gets emailed to us.
Okay.
That's been the process for the last 4 years, 3.5.
Yeah, 3-ish, yeah.
There's some sense to this in that the state has specific fire standards and fire codes that haven't been adopted by the county. We rely on each fire district if they're going to enforce or adopt or enforce their own fire codes.
Okay.
So it allows the fire district some opportunity to say, oh, that encroachment, or sorry, that your driveway's not wide enough, or it's not to a certain standard, so just be aware we can't fight a fire there if you build that structure there, or something along those lines. So I think they've had a number of these conversations with folks and just to let people be aware of the limitations that they may be placing on themselves without a fire engine be able to turn around or something along those lines. The sewer districts, that makes a lot of sense because the sewer districts are at certain capacities.
Sure.
And we don't want to assume that they have capacity. So if they're under some moratorium, or if they have only so many ERUs, or maybe or equivalent residential units, or maybe they have something in place saying we don't allow more than one connection per house or per lot. So I don't. There's so many of these that I don't know all of their standards. So requiring a sign off, I think it falls under that health safety aspect.
Okay. On D, I would like to clarify.
Can we go to C before D?
Oh, sure.
Can I ask a question on the end part where it says, essentially, if fire district has waived the need for residential fire safety, doesn't that sometimes occur where they just are saying your stuff's gonna burn down because they don't have access to it? What's that situation where they would do that? Because then on the ending part, and I'm thinking of not just the safety aspect where it says, safety requirements on the plat need not be satisfied if the fire waives it. What is that?
So
There's plat requirements sometimes from the fire district or department, and it says, like a cistern is required, or like a 2,500 gallon cistern on a property is required. Sometimes the fire department will actually waive that. Or fire sprinkler systems is
Yeah.
another one.
And these-
Defensible risk plan, fire risk plan are required, and sometimes the fire districts just waive those.
That's where I have a question on the why, when they also come here saying we need fire suppression. And so maybe that's a conversation with fire about their process by which they're waiving versus changing this.
Sure.
But the aspect of saying residential fire safety requirements on a plat need not be satisfied is a concern with them saying we need more fire. It's more than one fire chief that has made that comment. And so I don't want to participate with making it okay to not follow fire safety requirements and I don't understand why they would be waiving it if it was necessary.
Well, maybe it's a plat from
Yeah,
1978,
that's what I was
and then the
just-
standards and the technology has been updated so much now that we have tender trucks that they didn't have back then. So they have some requirement that's really old that we would say, well, the plat rules in this case. So I think this was added, this provision in this code was added in 21 or 16, where it said, the fire district essentially has the right to waive those, and especially if it's an older requirement on an older plat. That's really where I've seen this more often than
And
not.
I get that, but as we move forward, it doesn't restrict it to a year or a plat type. It's
Right.
saying just plat, which gives the opportunity for us to follow those. And maybe it's just working with fire on, don't waive this stuff because you need to put in the fire safety as we develop. Maybe that's where you work on it. That just caught my eye of why we would say residential fire safety requirements are waived on the plat without more specification than just they waive kind of a
The one
deal.
we see more often than not is these individual cisterns on lots where it wasn't required to be installed when the lots got platted, but it says like upon building a residential structure, this shall occur, and a cistern on site. And most of the fire chiefs, if not all of them, have weighed in saying, those are a risk to us if we pump water out of them because they could be algae or rocks or whatever it is. And
If
it's going
they're
to
not
ruin our.
maintained.
Yeah, if they're not, and there's no maintenance requirement, so they just have chosen, and they don't have a map as to which ones are good,
Yes.
which ones are bad. So that's more often than not the requirement we're seeing waived. And we'd let the individual know, like, you have to go to your fire chief and we have to get something in writing. Sometimes the chief will waive it, or the defensible space, sometimes they don't, so.
So, Director,
Yes.
I think part of the potentially problematic aspect of the language in C is the examples you've given make sense, and I've heard one or more fire chiefs speak about it, but this language in C is so broad that it sounds like any waiver could mean that none of the fire safety requirements need to be satisfied, and I'm wondering if we should just tighten the language to indicate that, if a specific item, fire safety item has been waived, then the applicable item need not be satisfied. It doesn't negate everything, and this language, I think, is so broad, it could be interpreted that way.
What if we just change the word from requirements on the plat need not be satisfied to may not be required to be satisfied, and then that's what we do on the planning side? It feels like Commissioner Domke said, too broad, and I don't know the conditions by which fire is doing that, but in part, like even if you listen to what Chief Armstrong was saying, they don't know the cisterns, but then who is required? Is that they're supposed to go and do their thing where they dump water out of those to make sure that it's available to them? And that the answer is we did our part and the cisterns are there, they need to maintain it if that's how maintaining one of those works. And I'm completely ignorant on that. So I don't know I know I've seen where the fire people go to the fire hydrant and they dump all the water out. And then as a community member, you say, why are you wasting all the water? And Chief Carpenter said that's because they're maintaining that line. Is it that we're not maintaining the cisterns that we're asking, and so instead of doing that, we're just saying we don't want the cistern versus saying we want the cistern for residential fire safety, and you guys need to do your part to maintain it. So I don't,
I think we can solve this problem if the bottom part of the sentence, the very last part, department, comma, if we had it say the applicable residential fire safety requirements on a plat need not be satisfied, then it would be whatever is applicable to the waiver.
Yep. Okay. That's easy.
Does that make sense to the other commissioners?
It does. I just want to make sure that we, as the county, don't start micromanaging people that we have no authority over, such as the fire department and all. And I'm just thinking in my head, one reason why they wouldn't, maybe they live on a creek or something, so that there's a water supply, or they have an alternative water supply, so we're just going to waive it. But I don't want to get into the micromanaging or managing someone else's job. But I think if he did that, Brian, that might serve the purpose.
I agree with you, and that's why I'm hoping by adding that one term, we can just not have it be falsely interpreted into a broad brushstroke application, and then let them manage the details on what they're willing to waive and why.
It should still just be left up, the ultimate authority is the fire district.
well, what's happening in this sentence though is the fire district can still waive it and say we don't care, but the county can say that, especially when you're talking in my mind, I think about the future development aspect, because sometimes these things that a neighborhood, based on when you look at our comprehensive plan, we know where we're going to increase density. And so today it might be just one plat that's there, but as you look at the future growth, the county may need those residential fire safety aspects available. So essentially it's it's going to the person building, and you're saying if applicable, what the fire said can be excluded, but it's giving the opportunity to address fire safety. So, and have some control versus just a blanket, you don't have to do anything if you can get the chief to say you don't need to. This is a hard one because fire isn't here to give their input on why would they even be giving a waiver to begin with on some of these plats. I just feel like the language could be tightened, and I think applicable would work, and then satisfy even your comment about not micromanaging fire, because fire would still be making the determination, and the county saying that they're accepting the applicable, but not all encompassing fire safety is not required. So can we agree on applicable and go next?
That's fine. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not really in charge of
Yeah.
fire safety for Bonner County. That's
It's
not
that
really our
health and
role.
safety part that pulls us into other people's functions, and then maybe the answer is, let's develop a better relationship with fire to have an understanding of those waivers, so that when they're looking at our applications, they're meeting our residential fire safety desires versus those that live in the stinking word.
Timbuktu?
Oh, no, what is it? What was my exchange word?
Rural areas.
In those areas, a lot of times the fire response is you're just going to burn down. There's no actual residential fire plan given. And that it's equally what Chief Armstrong was arguing about in terms of insurance. It is difficult to get insurance when the answer is just you live in that space. It was countrified. I'm gonna change it to countrified.
Countrified?
Countrified.
You change
I looked for
rural to
synyms.
countrified?
It was countrified, so,
It was easier to say.
Yeah.
Okay,
That- so-
Anything else on 110?
no.
D.
Okay.
So just a clarification with the Panhandle Health, it says that no building permit shall be issued, blah, 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 without a comment letter from Panhandle Health indicating they have reviewed the file or the comment period has passed. Is that literally what it's limited to and not approval from Panhandle Health?
So Panhandle Health, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just want to make sure that, yep, they're checking a box saying that they reviewed it. Is that the extent of it on this section right here?
On this section, yes. There's another section where they have to grant approval, and we can discuss that in a minute.
Okay.
So you might be addressing this later. What's the reason that we're not requiring people to get approval from Panhandle Health before the BLP versus their canned letter that says, I can't do anything because I didn't do a test hole?
So the canned letters we usually see with subdivision files or land use applications, like a variance or a conditional use permit. So we never see those for building location permits under Title 11. We usually see something like either they have or they have not applied for a permit. They have a historic permit, here's a permit number, or we looked through our records and couldn't find anything. Is that about right? Okay. So they usually, how responsive are they within the 10 days in your experience?
I think right now they're getting busier, so
Yeah.
Bill's been waiting the 10 days pretty much before issuing them.
Okay. So the other option, which is what it was pre-16, 17, was we required
17.
PhDs sign off before we could issue a building location permit. So
Or I
when-
think even take the application in, they had to have a sign off from PhD.
I thought it was issued, like it would hold up our issuance. If I
In
remember.
2017?
Yeah.
Oh, I have
So
no idea.
then in 21, yeah, September of 21, so it was removed completely. PhD was completely removed from any building location permit. The frustration on their side was there's no flow of information. So they were unaware of where new structures were going in. So over about a year span, we developed the code as it's written now, and we made a minor alteration to it in 2022, where it gives them information to be able to review, understand where it's going, or where structures are going in. And then it gives them the ability to hold off on us filing our permit until subsurface sewage has been satisfied. So that's a long answer, but I'm not there yet, so give me 1 second. The rationale behind why we don't require it at the beginning, this, like I said, is the middle ground approach. Requiring it at the beginning, it's going to hold up a lot of building permits from being able to be accepted and or issued, especially during the winter months when people are trying to get in to apply for permits. So that's some rationale, but there's some others.
So on this one, I question, why are we pulling Panhandle Health into all permits versus just the residents that have septic? Because if I put up a structure, especially with what we just changed, I don't think that I should have to get a comment from Panhandle Health. And would it be appropriate to change this to residents, not just building or structure? Because I think that is too much involvement with, they don't have anything to do with those structures. And then when it comes to the residents, the idea of getting that septic approval before we give the location, the reason what happens is people get their BLP, and then some people start, and then we have this case, and I can't remember who it was, where they started building, and they built it in a way that Panhandle Health then had an issue with, well, you did all of this, but we have a septic issue. And we were talking about the residents. So for a residence, it seems like it does make sense to say, you need to get your approval from where your septic is going to be, because you have to do your septic, your drain field, and then your secondary. but not that Panhandle Health should be involved with any other structure that's not a residence that doesn't have plumbing.
We need an exemption for accessory buildings.
Well,
Because this one, in D, it says any building, residence, or structure.
Right.
So the rationale back when we developed this code was that, according to Panhandle Health, oftentimes people are either building over and on top of their current septic system or in the only place or one of the only places for a replacement system. So they wanted to be able to at least provide comment to people saying, you appear to be, to attempt to build over the top of your septic system, which is not a good idea, or you're building right next to your septic, which is the designated, per this permit, the designated replacement field. So you'll have to identify a new replacement field. So that's the reason why, if I remember right, Katie?
Okay.
Okay.
And Director, I can confirm, I actually spoke with some folks from Panhandle Health recently about this and asked them their opinion, and that was exactly the reason they gave.
Okay, I can accept that answer. I just trying to reduce as much
I get it.
government
Yeah.
involvement, and that has been Panhandle Health is, they have asked for on the resident side too, that they can't really evaluate building location permit for septic unless they went out to the property and did test holes. And so that's been a back and forth where members of the community don't like that for the reason you said, but why would we give them a building location permit before the Panhandle Health signed off? Because what we're saying is, in the wintertime, someone might want to start to build, so they want that permit. And we give it, and then that may be the only available site for their septic system by the time Panhandle Health signs off. And so
The other aspect on this is, from my experience, PhD is entirely preventative. They don't have an enforcement mechanism. So when someone builds a septic system that's not permitted, they're going to rely on us to try to help with their enforcement. They want to prevent all the problems from happening. And if we require a sign off at the beginning and people then don't want to get a permit because they don't want to work with PhD, then they'll build without getting a permit from us. So that it's going to go back into this compliance cycle of, we're going to send them letters, we're going to put a notice on their title or something along those lines. But, or let's say we send them letters and then they come in, well, what do I need to do? Well, first go to PhD and get approval. So we're just preempting, or we're requiring them to go to Panhandle Health, and we're then the enforcing body for PhD essentially.
No,
in a roundabout way.
or you're enforcing the building, the location of the building being in the appropriate spot so that the health and safety because the whole reason Panhandle Health permit exists is to address where's the appropriate place for your septic system or whatever. And so if that's what their function is, the building location permit being done before Panhandle Health puts us in a problem with the septic system in the community, which that's what we have to address. And so the argument of it's easier on us to give the person the permit and then let them work out all their issues with septic still leaves us with the health and safety aspect. And I don't know, I understand why people don't want to get in line at Panhandle Health. And I understand the short development season, but our current process says build first and then figure out what to do with the septic system later. And
Well, it says you can, it doesn't require it, right? Like, I personally am working on a shop with an ADU in it. I went and got my Panhandle Health permit before I came in and applied, because I wanted to know, is the location I plan on putting this conducive to a septic system, and what's going to be my requirements? So they could preemptively do that.
You could, but the way we have it set up, it doesn't push you to do that first.
Yep.
We actually make it easy to not address the health and safety aspect of septics. And so that's been a question that's come up. I understand people don't like the Panhandle Health route, but then the county as a whole ends up in a problem if somebody doesn't do that. And so you think of smaller acreage where someone is struggling with, where do I put it with what's on my availability, and then we essentially have, I just feel like we're out of order doing it this way.
Okay.
I understand the structure argument, I can accept that, they just want to know. And if you did it the right way, they don't even come out. They just know where your drain fields are and they say, yeah, it can go there. What are the other commissioners' thoughts on,
I can see
BLPs
both
before.
arguments, which is very tough. So I've actually seen a situation where the homeowner is building his own house, and he starts building the house without a permit and doesn't understand how septic systems work, or, water runs downhill, right? So the only place that he could end up building his leach field was above the house, which created more expense and everything else, because he has to put pumps and all that good stuff in, because he doesn't understand, and I get it. So I understand the argument for having the panhandle prior, so that they can say, hey, you could put it up here, but just know that it's gonna be an extra 10 grand, because you have to put pumps and everything else in. And I see your side of the argument as far as, they're not coming out 6 months of the year.
I really don't have a position one way or the other. I'm just explaining some
No.
history behind why these decisions were made. So
It makes total sense.
And I can see the both rationale. It's really, do we want to help people protect them from themselves and in potential problems? Or do we require them to be responsible for their own actions but then you have a whole public health, safety, welfare side of this. And are we allowing structures to be put in or dwellings to be put in without an adequate sewer system? So it's a tough argument, and I've been arguing it since the day I got into this position, and I'm sure it'll continue.
So my perspective is we too many people are ignorant to the realities of how these systems function and the necessary setbacks and the size of these systems. And so by the county issuing a BLP without requiring PhD approval for the septic, we are in essence, in my opinion, telling people it's not a concern. We're encouraging them to proceed with costly construction of a building without them having done the proper planning up front to know if it's a good idea. And I think it's unintentionally misleading the public and misleading ignorant people to make bad decisions. And I do think we have an obligation to help protect them from themselves, as someone said, and just prevent there from becoming potentially future litigious issues. It's an awful situation, because I've seen too what Commissioner Corn's talking about, where people are forced into situations that they would have made a different choice and they would have had a better outcome if they had done things in the right sequence. And so I think the current code is just encouraging people to be ignorant and to not follow a more thoughtful and useful process. So I do think, given the health and safety aspect of it, it makes sense to me to use the code to lead people down the better path of getting a PhD approval before issuing the BLP.
So I think we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole.
A little bit, yeah.
Because we're discussing D,
That's fine.
and we probably should bring it back in,
So-
because there's probably someplace further down that we're gonna.
No,
bring
we
this-
actually already passed.
Oh, did
Well,
we?
well, and it's
This
the way
idea-
this sentence is, it puts it in there a little bit.
On D?
On D, because it only requires a comment letter.
Right.
That's what drew my attention, is who cares about a comment letter, why we don't get approval or, so
Well,
anyhow.
coming back to the accessory dwellings that we discussed earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
A comment letter might be very well appreciated if I was gonna put my building over my leach
Yeah.
field that I didn't know was there.
Yep.
And so I would appreciate a comment letter from PhD saying, well, your septic system's right there.
No, I mean, that's what sparked my question on having, before we do residential BLPs for new construction, that we do that. It just popped in that sentence. So I don't know where it fits.
So that is and we've had this discussion, I think, with the two of you before Mr. Domke was seated. And my position is that is a very substantial I wouldn't say drastic, very substantial change to the code that's going to change a significant process and projects that people have planned. So kind of given that idea, I think it would be prudent to hold a public hearing on that specific item. So carve that out into a different amendment than what's being proposed here, and let staff workshop internally and present to the board. And we'll have a meeting with PhD and see if we can get the wording correctly, and then have that as a separate. That way we separate these two ideas. This is kind of cleanup throughout the code. That's kind of a new standard that the board, if I understand, would like to kind of see. So is that acceptable?
I'm agreeable to that. Sorry, I have a
So just
emergency.
leave D the way it's worded.
I think if we leave it for there and I have direction from the board, I'll work with PhD, workshop it, come up with some ideas. But if I understand the intent correctly, what the board's looking for is kind of some sign-off requirement, a signatory requirement, similar to what we have with the sewer districts from Panhandle Health on dwellings, and then a notice and a comment for other structure types. Okay. I think we would probably want to add commercial and industrial structures into the dwelling side. Oftentimes we hyper-focus on the residential because we see that the most, but we also want to ensure that we're looking at the commercial industrial as well. So,
Absolutely.
so we'll come up with some language there on what needs to be changed and why, and then kind of some, I got some direction. That'll work. Okay, moving on to 112. So this is just examination of the application, followed by initial inspection. Any changes or questions you have on this?
Just a question on E, the applicable agency authorizations.
Yep.
Are we just going back to sewer districts, fire districts?
That way, we're just saying, as part of our examination, we're going to look to ensure you have those things if they're required. So rather than restate it, we're just going to say as required in this title.
Okay.
So that's a good example of if the title gets changed and Panhandle Health is required somewhere in the sign-off, then we're going to look for that here. Okay. Initial inspection is a relatively new, I think we added this in 23 to give us more or less the authority. This was a best practice we had been doing and requiring, and this just codified that process. It makes a lot of sense that we go out and ensure, the initial inspection is to ensure where they're placing it matches the permit they provided to us. It's helped preempt a lot of required variances where someone says, oh, I'm 25 feet from the road right away, and they're 25 feet from the edge of the road, not the right of way, which is 60 feet, and the road's only 20 feet wide or 25. So we've been able to kind of help folks make sure that they're meeting all their setback requirements.
So I don't have a problem with anything except for B, it says establish temporary erosion control measures if applicable.
Yep.
I don't have a problem with that wording. I just have a little bit of an issue with maybe the requirements of erosion control at times, because I've seen it go a little overboard.
Sure.
With neighbors and things where you're pretty much on flat ground, but yet it comes in and we're telling them that they still need to put down the straw tubes and everything, or if there's vegetation, why would we have to?
Sure.
So I don't have a problem with this, but in the future, I'd like to maybe look into what
that's
our
the-
guidelines are for that, I guess.
That's out of Title 12, Chapter 7. I think it's labeled environmental regulations or something along those lines. So this is just the application of that other code. So when required, and we're going to go on site. So if someone doesn't have their straw wattles or their silt fence, we're going to say, hey, you don't pass your initial inspection, show me proof of that.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
We have this as an issue right now. Straw panels weren't installed for new construction, and all of the erosion destroyed a road. Does planning actually enforce if someone were to call and say, you guys let these people build on here and they didn't follow the erosion control? And what happens? Or is it just, we told them to throw the straw out, they didn't throw the straw out?
Katie?
If erosion control, temporary erosion control is required with your building location permit, then when we go out to do our inspection, they would fail their inspection if they didn't have their temporary erosion control installed at initial inspection. Did they get their initial inspection? I mean, that community member would just need to fill out a complaint form and we would investigate and enforce it.
Okay.
So to answer your question, yes, we do enforce on
Yeah.
lack of erosion control when required. So
All right, thanks.
Okay, 14, 114, sorry. I thought we had made some changes.
I thought you did too.
Oh, it's
the one
116,
below.
and I think we need to put it in both. Because this is assuming that a BLP or building location permit is denied. I think the way we have this written, we have occasionally where a neighbor disagrees with the issuance of a building location permit, or something gets approved with conditions that someone wants to appeal. So I think to cover those scenarios, rather than just say denial of a building location permit, it's just appeal of a permit application decision, so.
Jake, and it looks like we just skipped over 115 from a prior edit, so we might just want to reserve that for future use, or
Does 115 exist?
I don't have a
does?
115.
yeah, it's
Okay,
not showing up in this marked up copy.
Give me a second.
There's no, I printed off of the
So there-
permit list and there's no
115 doesn't exist. So it looks like somebody has deleted a couple of these code
And they
sections
didn't change the
and not
numbers.
updated numbering. So
Yeah.
either I'll add it in as 115 and put it as reserved, or just update all the numbering after the fact. It's just,
Yeah, we have 117 as well, is that way.
yeah, I'm looking at the code on another screen. And yes, it looks like it goes from 13, 14, 16, 18, 19. So I'll renumber all of these on my final draft of this. It's a good catch.
No, yeah, you started that discussion earlier, so now I'm looking for it.
We'll clean it up. Okay, back to the topic at hand. So 114 is just that, like I said, denial application or the denial information. This is an add here is under 116. Again, it's just an appeal, and then we're adding section B to state that we have to provide a written notice within 5 business days. And that's copied out of every other section where there's an appeal that goes to the board. I don't know why it wasn't added here. It's not just best practice, it's required in other parts of the code. So we're just requiring that decision from the board to be in writing within 5 days, which is pretty typical.
Which one are you on?
116.
B.
Can I ask on A?
Sure.
And this is just when it says within 10 working days, is that Monday through Friday? We're not counting, is it business days that you're
It's business
counting?
days, yeah.
I know it's minor, but can we change it to business days? Because that one people know that when we count, we're not counting Saturday and Sunday. Some people work on the weekends. Can I ask this actually? Does it have to be that it has to be heard within 10 days, or that it can be scheduled it has to be scheduled within 10 days? And I would actually like to argue that it should be scheduled within 10 days so that we can, with the understanding that we're going to do our best to hear their issue quickly, but that sometimes the calendar is not conducive to scheduled and heard within 10 days.
I think it says just schedule a meeting
Yeah,
with the board within 10 days to
Commissioner
hear
Williams and I
the
had this
appeal.
conversation on the appeal of the administrative appeal under Title 12. It has the same language, scheduled within 10 days, or schedule a meeting with the board within 10 days. Bill has weighed in saying, well, it's kind of vague. I think you have a different interpretation of that, Commissioner Williams. We could specify saying schedule within 10 days and the meeting occurring within 30 days or something along those lines to really specify, like, get it on the schedule and it has to be within a month or something like that. That way, we're not scheduling it within 10 days and putting it out 45 or 60 or something. It's really trying to put some action on our part. When we get an appeal, they think this is for a building location permit. These guys are going to be held up essentially on processing until we hold the meeting with the board. So to try to get some expectation as to how soon do we have to hold a meeting. So we try to do it within 10 days with the board, but you're right, oftentimes, especially like BOEs or budget time, when you guys get swamped, it's hard to get in.
That's my worry is, I think that the spirit of the rule was to expedite making sure we heard people that were getting, but when you come to the months that we're doing BOEs, getting on the schedule to be heard for a BLP, sometimes the 10 days is hard to do, especially given when it occurs. So what does the board think about shoring up the language so that it's scheduled within 10 days to be heard within 30 days? So that we're meeting with the other thing that we've read.
And so I've added, and maybe I'll wordsmith that a little bit. So it says scheduled within 10 business days with the meeting held within 30 days or something along those lines.
With the hearing, the
The
appeal, or whatever.
Meeting, yeah, held within 30 days.
Within 30 days after scheduled? Because they're going to want to count their first 10 days as part of the 30 days.
Within 30 days of receipt of the appeal. How about that? That way it gets resolved within 30 days. And we're going to we're going to give them the notice of their meeting within 10 days of receipt of their appeal.
Yep.
And that way that reduces the hardship.
We usually schedule within 2 or 3 days. Like
Okay, so-
we don't ever sit on it for full 10 days.
Yeah.
Appeals we take really, we make quick action on
And
because
for the most part, we hear them within the 10 days. I just don't want to be locked into that during busy times.
I think that's an appropriate change in Title 12 as well. So maybe I'll add that. We can discuss it next week because I think we're going to talk about those same code sections in Title 12. So it might be appropriate to add that same language there.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with that change.
Okay, moving on to 118. We're going to skip 117 because it doesn't exist. So 118 notifications to the assessors, this is just saying that we're sending that information to the assessors, and we have a pretty good flow of information with them.
That's the snitch code. Increase your taxes right there.
What's that?
I made a joke that only he could hear.
Okay,
He agreed with me, though. He laughed.
okay.
I said that's the snitch code where you increase our taxes.
All right, moving on to 119.
He wanted to hear what I said.
He didn't laugh.
He did. He said, well, when you look, yeah, that's where our taxes go up. Building location, no. It's not your fault.
So 119 is that notice of completion. So this is where we require the Panhandle Health acknowledgement that wastewater disposal requirements have been met. So of course, as we discussed earlier, we would change this final sign off. Probably we would remove it entirely if we're going to require a sign off at the beginning rather than the end. So I don't think we need to have a double requirement with PhD, but let us wordsmith this, come up with our draft with PhD's response to it, and then provide that to the board future. So
Well, it would need to stay if they're still just doing, or are you just going to do a commenting period on accessory
think
structures
so.
and no final sign off from PhD?
I think so.
Okay.
I think that's appropriate.
I think so too.
Okay. Anything else on 119?
Nope.
Okay. 120, compliance with other codes. So this is just kind of some legal language in here saying you have to there's other codes that apply that you might need to get permits for. So if you don't have any questions on that, we'll move to 122. Looks like we skipped 121. Man.
I have some issues on 122.
I think we all do.
Yeah, this is. probably
Maybe
the
he'll
most
change
boring.
it all and we don't have any, so maybe
So how about I explain?
you
like,
explain it first.
What we've
Okay.
changed here, and then some input I'd like from the board, and then if you have other things you'd like, feel free.
Delete the whole section.
So some of this is, we've added start of construction in a number of places, and that's because we have a definition for what start of construction is. We'll go to the definitions here in a little bit. If you want to change that, we can debate it then. We are proposing right now, so right now there's a 1 year, so they have 1 year to start construction before the permit expires. We're proposing changing that to 2 years. Let's see. First, they have to, that's probably the major change in A. Then there's that last sentence in A. It says, in order to renew action on a building location permit after expiration, the permittee shall pay the amount required for a new permit for such work. So in this, I haven't started construction before my permit expires. Right now it's 1 year, we're proposing 2. This requires them to pay for a new permit, but we discount some, right? There's some other things that we don't require.
Right, we don't require the floodplain review, technology, and GIS fees.
Yeah, some of the external outside of our requirement. So
It's just the base permit fee.
I have a comment on here that says, is this a fair standard to require a full fee to reopen an expired permit? On our side, I know, just let me finish, I'll get there. And I'll open it up to you. So
comment
our
on that
side,
too.
when I asked Katie about this, well, how much of a review, how much time does it take us? It's pretty nominal. It's like half an hour at most. We re-review things to make sure that code hasn't changed, and then we just reissue. So charging a full fee doesn't seem equitable, but that's what the code says right now. So now I'll open it up for discussion.
So my
Go first.
comment on your comment is no.
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that.
Okay. So I'm going to go back another sentence or so, back up on A, after your 2 years. Before such work can be recommenced, a new building location permit shall first be obtained to do so, and the fee therefore shall be the amount required for a new building location permit for such work, and provided further. So that language to me is I have to apply or reapply for another building permit. And one of the issues I've always had in the past is things have changed in the 2 years since I got my first one, and now I'm gonna get denied for some reason. Could be denied, right? The potential is there, because of the way it's worded. So to be clear, we're talking about, I get a building permit, I do absolutely nothing for 2 years, and what we want to require of them at this time is for them to come down and get a new one, because the other one, the original one, has expired. Is that how it's working as this is written today?
We don't make them reapply. We would just use the same permit that they are, because why would make them submit something that is exactly the same that we already have in our system? We would just review it again, and they would pay that fee to renew their permit.
Why do they have to pay I guess my question is.
Because the code
why does
said
it
so.
expire? Well, no, I'm asking, why do
Yeah.
we make the building location permit expire? Once we've gone through the work and approved that you can put a building there, why does it expire? Why can't it just be, we already reviewed it, you didn't build it, you didn't change anything, you can put that building there? Because then you capture when they have to do their occupancy or completion, that's where you see that they actually did build. In North Idaho, people take a long time to build. And I just don't see that if all we're talking about is where you put the building and nothing changed, I personally push for it shouldn't expire unless they change something. And if they change something and they didn't come in and show you the change of where their location was, that's one thing. What are other people's
Yeah,
thoughts on the
I
expiration?
agree with that. And as a property owner, I may want to get a building location permit on a piece of property that I'm going to sell, so that the value may increase because I already have a building location permit. Would that transfer over or not?
Stays with the
It
property.
stays with the property, okay. So some people may be leery of a piece of property for one reason or another, say, well, I'm not sure if I can build on this. I like the property, but I don't know. So the original owner goes and gets the BLP saying that, and it's all signed off by Panhandle Health and everything else, right? That, yes, this is where the septic system go. I think that would increase the value of the property for resale, but that might not happen. That resale might not happen for 3 or 4 years. So I'm kind of having a difficult time too understanding why it would expire, because nothing has changed.
And I'm not looking in a way of, we should be looking for how do we get money from taxpayers, but what was the work that planning had to do? And planning doesn't have to do anything except say, okay, here's the same thing that you already asked for. So why let it expire? And that will reduce work on planning.
Well, codes change over time too. So that's, oh, sorry, Brian.
No, that's fine, Katie. That's exactly the area I was going in. So please proceed.
Oh, codes change over time, and I know that permits say they expire, but you can extend these permits too. So if you don't start construction, you can extend them for $50 or something to
But
extend for another 2 years.
Why are we charging people? So even if the code were to change and I were to build that building, I'm okay to build that. If I started my project and my permit expired because I didn't complete that full project, I'm not, nothing about what I'm building is going to change. It doesn't matter what the code is. And so, especially the idea that we even say, pay me $50 and I'll say that it's not expired. That's really what we're charging people for versus maybe then your argument is if something changed, but I don't really see that as what we're doing. We're telling people, your BOP expired, you need to renew it, nothing about your plan changed, so here's your reduced cost of the renewed BOP for an additional amount of time.
So,
Here's an example. Our county has changed the setback distances in different zones in over the years. And so if I apply for and receive a BLP, but for 5 years, I do nothing to start the construction of that project, but the county updates the code and says, it really, the setback to deal with concerns and issues and provide proper buffering between neighbors, shouldn't be 20 feet, it should be, 30 feet or something different. We are preventing the ability to try and utilize the improved code in the future, because if we leave these permits in perpetuity, then what could happen is we just have people applying for permits all over the place to just kind of lock things in and play a game and get ahead, and it circumvents the purpose for why we have the code.
I don't think I think BLPs are, it's not like when you look at Commissioner Corn's example of get a BLP for where you can build a house, that doesn't mean the person actually who buys a vacant piece of property would want to build where that BLP is. And I think that the argument of what we see in Bonner County is people start their projects and they take a very slow time to complete the projects because it's a very difficult in our in our unincorporated areas, it's very difficult sometimes to get your projects completed, especially when you're doing it on your own based on what your available travel time is. Like where I am, our ability to do construction is once the ground hardens up after winter. And that's a very short period of time to get a truck up to the mountain. So if a BLP expires in 2 years and you're doing a large project, we're charging someone unnecessarily. And I think that's more of what we see in our area is people who have longer projects with BLPs that expire and they're not changing anything.
It's not about how long it takes to do the work, it's about getting started. That's the discussion I believe we're
No, but right, but this falls into you have to get it completed too.
no, this is start of construction.
So when you're in this section, and if you were to change it to 2 years, the idea, if you changed it to 2 and you just started, then you wouldn't consider the BLP expired ever?
So that's the next section, what we're going to talk about here shortly. But this is just specific about start of construction. You have to start construction right now, within 1 year, we're proposing it going to 2 years. If you don't start construction within that time frame, then that last sentence applies that says in order to renew, you have to apply for a new permit.
Because in this section, well, maybe the latter part is confusing to be in this section because it says before something can be recommenced, and which implies there's something related to having started.
Right.
So maybe
we need to remove that sentence altogether.
it says before such work can be recommenced, a new building location permit shall be first obtained to do so. So then does that section not belong there? Because that's after the start comment.
I think that's pertaining to, I want to say there's a portion of the code, it might be under C, that talks about, like,
Because it's not,
if
there's something about this that this is why I'm making the argument here, because
Yeah.
when you read down, it actually talks about it being suspended and restarted, so.
like, after a certain amount of time it's stopped, then you have to recommence it. And I can't say that we've really enforced that.
Because that's why I'm making the comment
No, that's
about,
fair. I think we can take the intent from the board here and craft that into these code
Yeah.
sections. A lot of this was to start the conversation and kind of figure out what you guys want.
no, I get
So,
it.
I think we can solve the concerns. I think there's some validity to having an expiration date for start of construction. You don't start within 2 years. it's expired.
I'm fine with that
Okay.
one. I'm fine with that aspect, but it's the latter part in this
Yeah.
that causes me to make the comments that I'm making.
And
That's
Jake,
fair.
where
Yes, sir.
did we talk about, you and I talked about this, where do we talk about, what does it mean that construction has started? Does that mean that I'm
There's a-
clearing the trees and leveling the pad? Or does that mean utility ditches are dug?
There's a definition for start of construction. We'll get to definitions here in a
Okay.
little bit.
Okay,
So, and we could add or take away something from that if the board wants.
okay.
So I think we have a good understanding on start of construction. Back to that last line, like what do we want to require? So someone, let's say they've gone through the process, they've gone through with us, something happened, their financing dried up or something along the lines, they were building a road for too long and they haven't started construction on the project. What does the board want to require? A new application, a renewal of that application? We could address this, saying a renewal application is required, and then we can change it in the fee schedule as to what that is.
I would prefer that over a new one.
Okay,
And Katie, did you say it's about half an hour of time to do a review to renew a BLP?
Yes.
in one scenario I can think of, I think Commissioner Domke brought this up, is you don't want people just essentially locking in their use and their density forever. So if you just allowed like no expiration whatsoever, the one concern I'd have is, let's say we're changing the use tables and all of a sudden the zone for that property gets changed and they've applied for a machine shop or some other commercial use. And the planning commission decides we don't want that type of uses there, or even a permitted use on their property altogether. If you have that forever, then forever you're going to have a machine shop potentially show up someday. So I think having an expiration date is prudent. What that is, I think it's debatable with the board. I think 2 years is fair. But
I think so.
I have to keep bringing up commercial industrial because those are some other more intensive uses we oftentimes see. So
I think that 2 years is fair for your start, because I think it also will trickle down to addressing sometimes when people have projects and they come in and they need extensions or whatever. So if you guys make those adjustments, I think that would be good.
And then if I want to start after 2 years of doing nothing, I just need to come in and renew my,
So we'll change
Renew
that
the-
last sentence to something about a renewal of the
Yeah.
building location permit. And then we're working on an update to Title 11 fee structure, so we'll add a renewal cost into that. So, okay, great. So on to the next section.
We're skipping 23.
What's that? No, B
We're
and
going to
C.
B.
So that's just concluding our conversation on A. So the
Yeah.
current practice on, that we've been utilizing, when I had a conversation with Katie, we realized it's not codified, but if an applicant provides proof of continual progress of construction on a valid permit, staff extends expiration date without an extension application or fee. So this practice, again, isn't codified, but I think it's fair. A good example, we have an older gentleman who's been building a log cabin for like 7 years. And every year he sends us a photo saying, this year I've done X, Y, and Z. And you can see, this has been put in. Or this year I installed my septic permit or septic system and here's my septic permit. Or this year I installed a porch off the front. So here's my, stuff for the porch. So it's all under his permit, but he just has spent 6 or 7 years building this log cabin. So I think, when I've heard from the rest of the board, you want that practice to be able to be codified here. Without any fee, we can use aerial imagery to verify this. We can look at it and say, oh, it sure looks like you're making construction on this. Or we could require the onus be on the applicant or the individual. To help with this, one side of our technology-based solution is we're going to start sending automated emails to people saying, hey, your permit's going to expire on such and such date. Please provide us with proof of continual progress or something like that. So it
but
gives
the
them the
permit
opportunity.
doesn't expire once they start.
Well, let me see. If they don't have continual progress, so how does that work, Katie, on continual progress?
I thought that there was an X amount of days in there that says that they're not making progress within such amount of time, then I think that's what we were talking about earlier.
Oh,
That first,
it's
before.
this stuff here.
Yeah.
because things happen sometimes financially, it's like, well, I've got it, my job I've been at for 20 years, blah, blah, blah. I'm building this out of pocket, so I start building the basement. I'm getting, the stem walls are up and everything, and then I get fired. And I may not be able to get back to it for 3 years or so. But the foundation's already there. You're not gonna move it.
That's fair.
So,
I think that it's a pretty rare occurrence for somebody to stop construction once it's started.
I would
It
think
does
so.
happen, but it's not very common.
I think we all agree that A and B need to be reworked kind of entirely. So I think what we can do is codify this idea of the current practice. So after construction has commenced, or the start of construction, or labeled it there differently. So after start of construction, how long should that permit be? Let's say no progress is made. How long should that permit be valid for?
I don't know if we could put an expiration date on that. Like I said, what happens if I put $50,000 of my cash into this because I don't want to take out a loan? Just like the scenario I just used, and then I lose my job, or I get sick and I have medical bills or whatever. That might sit for 5 years or 10 years, and that's on the homeowner, the property owner, whether or not wood's rotting or whatever. Hopefully it's just concrete up so far. But at what point in time do we as government step in and say, well, we want you to apply for a new one, or whatever the process is?
Yeah, Commissioner Corn, I agree that if they've already started construction, then they've locked in that permit, they've locked in that use with whatever the applicable code was at the time. So we're considering that to be acceptable. And then I don't want to penalize someone who has challenging life circumstances or simply is, slow at making progress, because we've already, as a county, we have accepted that use in that location on the property. So I can't think of a scenario where we're doing harm to not have an expiration date on that permit.
I agree.
Does staff have any, can staff think of any scenarios where somehow we're unintentionally allowing harm to occur because a permit doesn't expire once they've commenced with construction?
The one thing I can think of would be your commercial or industrial standard, right? So if someone puts in a foundation for a gas station, and then later that gas station use is prohibited or removed, and then they never move forward, and someone later, 5 years down the line, buys it and says, oh, I still have a valid permit on this gas station, and then completes the construction. So
What
That's a
about
hard
if it
call,
was,
though.
what if then it was just specific to residential BOPs?
Yeah.
Because I think that's where you see, it's because a lot of people pick Bonner County because of the building, the way you can build. And I am in that boat, so I will just self-admit of building within your means slower building on top of the time. And I don't think that we should penalize someone because they're building slow. I think that we can definitely address the concerns that you're bringing forward, because I think on the commercial aspect, slow building is different than residential slow building.
Exactly.
And I think that maybe if we just said on a residential, that's where we're going to take that, it's not going to expire if it's slow, but address that environmental concerns and issues within commercial development do change, justifying us to require those BLPs to expire. I think that would address all of the concerns that the community, and I think by hearing both commissioners and you guys, would address. What do you think?
So my only concern would be the same situation. We always think commercial as being a big business or something, Schweitzer or whatever. What if it's myself and I'm building something commercially, a gas station, so let's use that same scenario, and I'm building it out of my pocket again, and I get the foundation up, I get the walls up, I might get the roof up, but I don't, doesn't really matter what stage we're in. And then, again, something happens and I can't get back to it for 5 years. And now our codes have changed as far as land use issues. Maybe we don't want gas stations in that zone anymore or whatever. What are we going to do to that person?
I think that the difference on the commercial versus residential is the commercial endeavor that doesn't get completed. The commercial aspect impacts the community, whereas the residential, and it's a different table with different requirements. The residential doesn't impact anybody other than the person who has to live in their fifth wheel, then move in their part that they built, and then kind of do it in stages. The commercial one has changes because you can have issues with water and whatever where, look, this was a bad idea. The person needs to complete it. And for the most part, on commercial endeavors, financially, with the way loans and financing work, typically outside of saying the small person, because that's outside of the bell curve, they need to get it done because it's not financially, fiscally responsible to wait years to complete their development. But from the aspect of residential use, not letting the single-family home expires is reasonable, but a commercial endeavor can have changes that planning has to address, and it would give us the opportunity to confirm that the components within the health and safety and all that stuff are still met with that endeavor.
So can we maybe, if that's the route that we're going to take, can we give the commercial side maybe just a smaller, not smaller, just a little bit of a larger window that may address,
Can't they come in and ask for an extension still, though? And maybe having them do that increases the communication with planning. They could still get an extension, but because they didn't finish, planning has an opportunity to say, hey, like like I say a lot, our stance on water is changing in the state. If you want to get water rights, people should get water rights because people are moving in a different direction. Planning would be able to educate the contractor who's building commercially to say, hey, you need to get this done because things are changing. Here's your extension, but you might not get another extension because they know more about the development kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable for the commercial person to come in. And commercial doesn't, I think there's a difference between the two permitting types. And I think there's a difference between my single-family residence versus I'm building out to say it never expires too, but.
Okay, so what I'll do is craft a expiration date abandonment for residential and one for commercial, industrial, and public uses, and resource-based uses. So we'll talk about it and we'll come up with an option for the board to consider. So, okay, I think we have a pretty good idea of your intent and what you guys would like to see. Under C of 122, I think we're still in. We'd like to change certified to first-class mail, and I just wanted your opinion on that. It costs us for certified mail something like $9.
Yeah, just about.
In the mailing cost versus a first-class mail, which is your traditional just stamp. In point of reference, the state has removed most of their certified mail requirements for state notices. So the cost of this is just becoming really frustrating.
I don't think we should have to send certified.
Perfect. I'd like to make these same changes in Title 12 when it comes to abandoning abandonment or expiration of permit.
I agree, that's a cost to the entire taxpayers for one person, so.
Okay, so,
We don't send tax notices certified.
all right.
So is C in conflict with what we had just discussed?
It probably is, and
Okay.
given your discussion today and your intent behind it, I'm going to rework this entire
Okay.
section. So I just wanted to bring up the certified first-class mail stuff, so I make sure I have a buy-in. Okay. Compliance. Reconstruction, this was Katie's note, reconstruction was removed, so we're looking in, we're in 11124A2. We've removed reconstruction in the code, so if someone, their pole barn falls down or gets demolished and they rebuild it, they don't need to get a permit. So For whatever reason, it wasn't removed out of the code here, so that's just to kind of align with the previous change in Title 11.
So I have problems with the words altered, repaired, converted, or physically maintained. And maybe you could explain to us why I would need a BLP if I want to alter my building, as long as I'm not enlarging it or building more square footage.
Yeah.
Repairing, obviously, I think that word is crossed out, right? Or
It's
you
actually
want to
not
take it
right
out?
now, and I was going to have this discussion because 11-101 states, rather than this list of words for compliance side, it's erected, constructed, set, placed, installed, enlarged, extended, moved, or converted, which I think would be more consistent to follow what requires a permit versus what is a violation or a compliance issue. So it looks like that has gotten refined over the years, and then this section just never was.
Okay. And converted, you're talking about a patio that gets enclosed or something like that?
Yes, or it could be a residential use that gets converted into a commercial use. I'm going to take my pole barn and make it a machine shop, right?
Isn't that really, because in your example, it shouldn't be a BLP, it's just because we're saying like a patio closed in would require a building.
Depends.
Is it in
If he wants to
addition to your
notify the
house, or
assessor.
is it just a deck patio? Like, what is the use of it?
If it's just so if you have a deck and then you enclosed it, that would require a building location permit?
Depends on how it was permitted initially. So if it was permitted as a deck, it would require like a change of use, right?
If it was permitted as a deck, yes. If it's in addition to your house now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? There's some gray areas there that
'Cause to
hopefully
me,
we're going to be able to
it's
clean up in
a
the
little bit
code.
of micromanaging of somebody built a deck, now you needed a location permit when it was if you enclosed your deck and it is a deck.
And it's
So
already been permitted?
if the deck already was permitted,
Well, you
And
go
you
back to
close
the
it in.
PhD standard, their size of their septic is based on bedrooms. If you add a bedroom to something, if you add a bedroom to a house,
you just
PhDs
go
are-
downstairs because I've done a lot of things wrong. My
right?
deck's not enclosed, my deck's not enclosed, I'm just like,
I don't have a deck.
it's,
It's a concrete patio.
what he's doing is taking our comments and sending out his spy camera.
Uh-huh.
My questions are
The
very
assessor's
specific right
drones.
now.
Again, no spy cameras.
No spy cameras.
Okay, so if the board agrees, I'd like to put that same list from 11-101 and replace it here in the compliance section.
Okay.
Okay. Other than that, I don't have any other proposed changes there or in the next section, other than the certified mail. Any questions from the board or comments regarding these compliance sections? We're on page 10 of 23, just a heads up.
11-125, your criminal prosecutions and your fees and all that good stuff.
Yep.
Is all that number 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, is all that enforceable?
No.
If we had an attorney dedicated to planning or we had deputized enforcement, then yes. As it sits today, no. I think Bill could levy these types of fines and fees against somebody. That would take a court action on his part. And if we had more of his time, we could probably do a higher compliance. This is kind of crafting the big club and not willing to swing it right now.
Okay, because I know that's one thing. So if I fail to get a building location permit for whatever reason, and that puts me in violation, the first violation, that would be my first violation, right? Is not getting a building location permit for building something that I need one for. I would be guilty of an infraction and shall pay a penalty of $300.
No.
No.
Jake, will you go up into that? The first one is seek voluntary compliance, so keep going up. It says compliance. I want to see pursue any or more of the following actions. Seek voluntary compliance. That's always our first step. And then it like lists down there. And then you jump down to the next one, violations, and
That is, we've tried to get voluntary compliance and they have refused all of our attempts. So right now, we stop at notice to title. for non-compliant structures. I think you guys have signed a number of those. Again, that's not a lien, that's just a notice for future landowners or purchasers of that property saying there's an issue with the county building regulations and that needs to be resolved. So this gives us another layer of enforcement that if, like I said, if we had those higher enforcement bodies or the ability to, these are the type of fines we could levy.
So it's mostly in there for future reference, possibly.
Yeah, so I think Bill could probably weigh in a lot on this, because I'm sure he would probably have some things to say about it, and if you guys wanted to change it, I would say let's have a conversation with legal about it.
And I guess, so down there under 5E, the action of the county,
Okay?
in the event any action is taken or any construction commenced in violation of the provisions of this code, the proper authorities of the county, in addition to other remedies, may institute any appropriate action or proceeding to prevent such unlawful action or construction, or to restrain, correct, or abate such violation, or to prevent any illegal act, conduct business, or use in or about such premises. So are we talking about red tags?
Well, that's the next section. It's
That's the
stop
next
work order.
section, okay.
So
I
that-
was just kind of curious how the process worked on E. How does the county go about doing that?
I don't know if we've ever utilized that code section. Not in my tenure here. The stop work order, we have placed a handful of those. We take it as we seek voluntary compliance first. I don't know if our current compliance team has issued very many of these, but go ahead.
Yeah, we just issued one, actually.
Oh, okay.
But they work really well, especially if people are building without a permit and either they don't know or they know and they're just moving forward. But it does work really well, and they're usually in contact with us by the end of the day and working on a solution, so.
Yep.
Okay,
How do we deal with this when it comes to trespass clause that we talked about earlier?
Oh, we would post it like on the edge of, usually
Edge of
the
the
right of way, yeah, in the ditch or,
Just wanted, I had a feeling, I
yeah,
had a general idea that's how we did it.
no trespassing,
I wanted to make sure the board was
knocking on
aware.
doors.
Yeah,
not doing that.
okay. So now we're on to definitions, unless you guys have any other changes there or questions. Great.
Yeah, so you just addressed B for me, thanks.
Yep.
So you're gonna do it out there on the public right of way. And C,
This is under 126 or
yeah, the one, let's see here.
the stop? work order?
126, yes,
Okay.
126C. Shall be subject to the penalties as described by this title. So I guess, again, it really doesn't hold a lot of water. We can, if Bill has time to, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, we can place violation fees. We do have the authority to do that at that point.
I think we need to leave it in because in part, that's part of where, as we get the prosecutor's office more staffing, that Bill has talked about, although right now it's not feasible for him to work on that aspect, but that's something that we should be utilizing to get that compliant. So I would say leave it as is, and then we use it. We haven't actually done it because he just doesn't have the time to do that right now. But I also think that with some of the changes that are being proposed, that the non-compliance will actually go down quite a bit.
I think so. We're loosening up a lot of things to help, so.
Yeah.
Okay, definitions? Unless you want to discuss some of the others, I'd like to skip to the ones we're proposing changes on and/or want some input on.
So where are we at in your,
I think attached,
are we 50% on what your recommendation is, or how far are we till your completion?
I think we're close to the end.
Okay.
Should be done before lunchtime, depending on how long the discussion is on. There's a couple of these, there's a lot of definitions in here. We have a number, just a small number of them we'd like to make some changes to. We're going to have some debate over the verbiage of attached and then the definition of a structure, and then a couple other small things. So, the first is addition. We'd like to remove height of a structure because we don't really regulate height of any buildings. I'm not sure why it's in there. Awning, and there's some rationale behind why we'd like to add this, but to add that an awning is a membrane fabric, retractable awnings are excluded from this definition. So more or less like I can attach it to the shop and or my house, and it's the membrane, it's the fabric you can buy at Home Depot or Costco, and then it can roll out and roll back in. We're saying those don't need to meet setbacks, right? It's not a permanent, we're treating it like the kind of temporary nature that it is. I mean, the way it's written right now, essentially those are part of your structure and need to meet setbacks and require permits and all that jazz, and I think that seems a little heavy-handed. So, under attached. So we've had a lot of debate internally over this, and then this has been frustrating from the public and we'd like to get some input from the board. So right now, the way it reads is a structure that is at least part of a wall in common with another building. So the way we've rephrased this is a structure that has at least a wall or a roof line in common with another structure. So Katie, can maybe you give an example or two of where this has been either used or abused?
I like the way you redefined it.
Okay.
Does anybody dislike the way?
Well, Jake and I had a discussion about this, and we went through some scenarios, like if we had a house and a detached garage, and now I want to build a breezeway between the two so it's covered, so I don't have to walk through the snow and the ice to get from the garage to the house. Is that going to require a building location permit? And so...
Well, is it going to require one or two?
Right, and we're talking about attached walls, and it's like if we enclose that breezeway, then it's going to share an attached wall. And I was trying to figure out a way to reference the original wall, like on the house, the structure.
Yeah, sharing a common wall.
Sharing a common wall, we said, could also be the lengthwise wall, right? Because now the garage is attached to the house, sharing that wall. So a support wall of the structure, some way to word that to where we're talking about, we're sharing a house wall. So that way, if I want to do an addition to a house, I need a building location permit, right? But if I'm just building an enclosed breezeway from a detached garage to a house, it's sharing a wall, but it's not sharing a common support wall as if you would like a duplex. Am I making sense?
Does it fit under our architectural projection? Because the way that's defined is anything attached to and extending outward from an exterior wall or face of a structure, so that would extend from an exterior wall. So why wouldn't it just be something like a canopy, kind of? Because isn't that what you just said captured in that?
Maybe let's add a couple scenarios we're trying to solve with redefining attached.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so one we just recently got, 2 RV dwelling units, and so they want to put an RV dwelling unit here, an RV dwelling unit here, but they want to enclose it with the shop. Was that it?
Yeah, with like lean-tos on
Is
either
that
side.
one structure then? Or are there 2 RV dwelling units in there?
Can we draw that?
I don't understand. Is it a one building over 2 RVs? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Well, kind of. They've done it a few ways. So they've had,
It was like, here's my RV. Here's my RV.
common space.
I want to build sorry, Brian. I want to build like a roof to attach these so I can walk between them. Is that attached?
I think that that's its own thing, because independent of those RVs, that's a structure.
Okay, if I build an awning or a roof line over the top of this, and a roof over the top of this, and then a roof between them
And
is attached.
that.
I think that idea is the floor plan of theirs becomes the whole square, even the open part. You see what I'm saying? And that then is its own building, because independent of those RVs, even though those are RV slots, that's a building, isn't it? He drew basically an H and then outlined each side of the H, and so inside each side of the H is an RV, and the line that joins the two vertical lines is a breezeway, Brian, if you can't
Gotcha.
see his thing.
No, I can't see it, but thank you.
And you're saying drawing, oh, sorry, Brian.
Well, I was just, in my mind, it's, if any part of the new construction relies on something existing structurally to support it, then it's attached, it's an addition to existing. If I can tear down the adjacent and existing structure and my new construction stays standing, then it's its own building, it's its own structure in my mind.
Yeah, but then we have to evaluate how the building is built.
Well, but I think the way you have it written now, if it has a wall in common, then it's structurally connected and it's dependent. If I could build a structure right next to an existing structure, right, I could have a pole building, I could sink posts directly adjacent and build a new freestanding wall as a part of a new pole building. And they're directly adjacent to one another, and maybe even, touching, but as long as it's not connected to that existing wall, it's its own freestanding structure.
Yeah.
We're playing Pictionary now.
Yeah.
He drew a
Pictures of-
square, like a piece of size.
You know what I mean, though? Because
Yeah.
it all comes down to, in my mind, it's simply, are you truly, like you said, do you have a wall in common? Are you using a part of the existing structure?
Yes, the struggle is, let's say I build a single-family dwelling, and then I extend, rather than, let's say I extend a wall that goes 200 feet away from the structure to attach it to my building, or put a breezeway between it. Is this one building or two,
I think so Mike, the difference for me would
or
be
100 feet?
the,
Sorry.
so many things.
If you connect two buildings together physically, you create one building.
If that breezeway requires you to go outside in the element and then walk, I think you actually have two different structures. If that breezeway is enclosed fully and I'm not going outside, I think that's one structure. And I say that because I've seen designs, and that's more on the commercial side, where they use that kind of a walkway and they enclose it, and maybe it's like a flower growing kind of path to the other side, but you'd never went outside for it. I think you could say that's one structure if it's completely connected, especially if on that single-family dwelling side, it's just an opening and I'm walking through it versus I went outside. But that requires you guys to know the answer of, is that just a walkway?
Well, we can codify this to
Yeah.
say, like, enclosed, right? Because we can look at that and say, okay, do you have walls and windows and a door? It's enclosed, right? We're not looking at the structural integrity of that. We're just saying, is it enclosed? Because we have other stuff where we say open and unenclosed, right? So it's a roof with a deck underneath, and it's open and unenclosed. So I think that's something we can easily regulate.
So in that same scenario, you want to call that, if it's enclosed, one building. But you built the house first of all, then a couple years later you built the shop, and then a couple years after that you're like, well, I'd really like to not walk through the mud and the ice and everything else. So you build your covered walkway. So does that turn two separate buildings into one?
No, because the covered walkway is not the same as an enclosed, I can walk from.
So let me restate that, an enclosed covered walkway.
So I'm gonna just say, so when we're building, still building, and we did our one piece and we have to build the second box. And we had decided, do you give a little bit of a gap so you can have a view as you walk to the library section, or do you want to push it closer to the house? And if I close the whole thing in as if I didn't need to go outside, it's an extension of the house. I think in your example of you built a shop, it's not the same use, and so they're two different buildings. But if it's part of my house and I just created a design that allowed me to go from one side to the other and it was fully enclosed, I think it's one. But if that square that's empty is a garage, I think that is two separate buildings.
So can you craft the wording to?
So it's not, I don't, because this happens. A lot of people put their shop next to their house.
Yep.
And so that doesn't mean, what we'd be saying is, if I just do a covered walkway over there, then it's just one big thing, but it's not.
But it has one location on the ground, right?
But that has two different ones.
Does it?
It
does,
because I got a
because it's
BLP
not-
to build the house,
You-
and then I got a separate BLP to build the garage.
No, that's the idea is this an addition to the house or is this a separate BLP?
I think
I
it depends on what was their plan when they started. So I think that's what you,
You assuming they planned when they started.
Right, okay, so you have a single-family dwelling, they want a hallway, right, all enclosed, let's say. And over there, their floor plan is a bedroom, a living room, and a kitchen, the bathroom. Is it all one single-family dwelling?
you're saying both sides have a kitchen in it?
Yep.
Yeah,
I think that you could go either way is the problem. I think that's where you
That
guys are
is the
stuck.
problem.
Because if you guys had, like, people have houses where it's top and bottom,
Yep.
where it's like but it's because it's all connected, we call it one home.
Yeah.
But in this example, they're taking their downstairs living quarters and they're moving it over. You could arguably say they built a duplex.
yeah.
If they put a
Or
kitchen in
house
it.
with an
Or
attached
It's
ADU.
or an ADU. It's not really an extension of it because they made it fully independent. I think that the floor plan then might determine that, because if you built in a kitchen on that side, it's completely independent of the other. How is that not your ADU, but a reasonably connected ADU if you were?
Well,
It's just
by our
hard to regulate.
definition of a kitchen, it more or less says it's a room used, and we'll get to it because it's in this list, that contains, a room used to prepare food that contains an oven, or a space for an oven. So if on the right side, the little box, say it's 1,200 square feet, but you have a food preparation place, but there's no oven in it, it can't be considered a kitchen, therefore not an ADU.
What is your recommendation, since you wanted to draw this?
I know.
We don't really want a
Because I think
clarification.
Yeah.
I think that the building, if it's a shop, in the example where you have it and it's extension of the house, I think it's hard to say it's not part of the original construction. It's,
We should just turn the recording on so we can talk, and then whatever that dictation comes out, that's what's the code is. Because it's hard to explain, isn't it?
well, no, and that one I think is difficult, because on one end I could see it's just my floor plan. I made a floor plan that, depending on what the location that I'm going to build it in, and if we can't rely on the plan someone gave for their building location permit, which I agree people don't follow that side could be seen as an accessory dwelling unit.
So I'm trying to understand where the word attached is used. So I think one of the places is whether or not I need a BOP, right? If I have an attached dwelling, can we say something along the line, give it a square footage? Anything under 300 square feet is not considered, or it doesn't need a BLP. That way, your 3 or 4 foot wide breezeway, enclosed breezeway from the house to the shop is 30 feet long. It's only 120 square feet. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas.
I don't think that that's really the issue.
Yeah.
I think that just clearing up that definition helps us with those types of scenarios because it's just hard.
I would not personally want to go get a BLP and pay the money and go through the hoops and have Pan on the Hill sign off on it and everything else. If I'm literally building a 30-foot long enclosed breezeway that's 3 or 4 feet wide, that's kind of one of my points.
I think the answer is they have to those two buildings then have to have a common wall that attaches to call it the same one then.
And which one's the common wall?
And that the walkway itself doesn't constitute the common wall to make it one. Does that fix the problem?
Yeah, I think
And,
so.
and so the walkway is a walkway.
So this building is sharing a common wall.
Even if it's a
with
hallway?
this.
Because there's,
Yeah.
I think that needs to be worded that it needs to share that common wall.
Well, I'm
And it
saying,
doesn't.
and I'm saying that it needs to share a common wall with the single-family dwelling, not the walkway that was built. Because the walkway pushes in a way that structure away from the single-family dwelling. And so attached isn't put up a 2x4 and say it's connected, it's use the full wall. That it has to have that common wall that makes it attached. And that, because, for garages, when we do it's specifically detached when it's not sharing that wall.
But I don't know.
So-
It all, to me, we have building location permits, we have locations on the ground. If the house is here and has a cover and it's going over to the garage, is that not all one location?
I think if it was all done on one BLP, if it was all done at once, I would venture to say, yes, it's all one. But when it's done separately, when the house is built, and then you get a separate BLP for your garage, or your shop or whatever, that's a separate one. And then at a third time, a couple years down the road, I just want to attach them. I don't know why that attachment would
But when I
require
commented
that.
about the first, just follow it, I think their problem is people don't actually do give the full plan. And I think
Yeah.
maybe we take it as that's just the consequence of you didn't tell us the full plan when you originally applied. And so if the original application included that design, can we just say that is one building location permit? Because that's the footprint that we inspected for that permit. And then when we do our electronic, what is it?
aerial imagery.
Aerial imagery
Aerial imagery.
of the location, and if the footprint changed from that, then you need a different one if you built a different if you did that, because you didn't show that. So you would need a different one, I think.
I wonder if we can require like a percentage of the wall to be connected. So like to be attached, it has to share 50% of a common wall or something along those lines. And it might, let me look around at some other jurisdictions on how they define this and how they solve it. Maybe this is a unique problem to us. Sometimes I run into.
doubt
Do
it.
you see a lot of it?
It's just frustrating.
It just becomes
mostly.
really hairy each scenario because you read the plain language of this and it allows for, a half wall between two structures, regardless of how far apart they are, it's considered attached, therefore one structure. So the problem really comes when someone wants to call an ADU not an ADU. They want to call it part of my main house.
Yeah, my master bedroom.
It's my
That's
master
100
bedroom
feet
with a
away.
bathroom and I have a microwave in there. I'm like, okay, really?
Right.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we permitted 20,000 square foot houses with 5 kitchens in it, and
Yeah.
we're not requiring them to get that might be an
No joke.
exaggeration,
Oh,
but I mean, like,
Look,
there might be
everybody's face.
4. But I mean, like, they have the
Yes. They have a
show
healthy
kitchen, the real
one.
kitchen, they have a
Yeah.
kitchen in their, garage area, outdoor kitchen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I really do think the reality is your primary dwelling, as long as you can meet the lot coverage requirements and the setbacks, you can build your primary dwelling however large as you want.
Yep.
You can have multiple kitchens, multiple bedrooms, bathrooms, it doesn't matter. And so it feels like we're fighting against something that we've already codified. If somebody wants to put in the cost and expense and build this sprawling, connected primary dwelling, then that's what we allow.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I've seen this in Oregon, and it's I don't know if the word village is right, but it's a group of people where they build a house, and they're all independent structures, but they have that breezeway in between those houses. And so are you saying then, Commissioner Domke, that even though they're all kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, independent, that because they built breezeway, that it makes it one?
Well, I think that would by definition be a multifamily, what's the right term?
Right now, we're playing, what is that, the family square? So we've got shop in the middle, single-family home, and squares all around it.
But now you're getting into like a duplex or, I mean, we have other definitions in the code for when you have a multifamily dwelling.
But I think the answer here is the attached aspect, because in this example, they're all attached.
That'd be hard to
one
argue that it's
BLP, like
not.
a shop shared in the center, and then there's free flowing, everyone can access everyone else's house from inside the shop. Yeah, this has been brought up because we've seen in some drawings, I don't think we've seen any of these come in on our permits.
No, we
but
haven't. We were
We've
just
had
talking
people
about.
ask, well, what if I just build a breezeway between these two buildings? Does that make it one building and therefore one house? So
Yeah, I think we need to also look at the definition of the multifamily dwelling, because that's part of what we're getting into. And then it's more complicated when you think about how, how insurance and fire regulations and all those things look at it. They're all going to call it one structure.
Okay.
And the other idea we had, moving on to section B, because that's all of A we have in our definitions, we could define breezeway and then exempt that from attached, saying breezeways are not considered attached or something like that. And we can talk about open and unenclosed versus enclosed. So,
It seems like the breezeway is our hangup, huh?
yeah, I think so, and helping define that. So let's workshop this a little bit more. We kind of just wanted to share some of our pain, so we appreciate you guys bearing some of that burden.
I appreciate the headache.
Yeah. I don't have any other changes to B or C. Moving into D, I've highlighted the different dwelling types only because they're never referenced in Title 11. So anytime we have definitions of something that we don't use throughout that title, I'm not sure why we have them defined. So I believe these, I'll have to double check that these are jive correctly with Title 12, but if they're not needed, I don't think we need to include, or if they're not used anywhere in the title, I don't think we need to define them. So,
See, detached says freestanding and structurally separate from other buildings.
That's my, that's an industry standard.
detached.
Yeah, I understand we don't have a building permit, only a building location permit, but from an industry perspective, detached means it's structurally independent.
And so what I was going to say is the drawing that you first drew, I think that arguably is detached from the original,
Yeah.
because it would be structurally independent. Anyhow, okay.
We do have this challenge that because we don't do building permits, some of our definitions require us to think practically in a way that we don't permit.
Yeah, exactly. Because oftentimes whenever we want to try to solve these, we want to talk about load-bearing walls or foundations or other things which are not required in any of our structures. So, and nor are we certified to say, what something is or what something isn't. So
Yeah, we're not going to take on the liability to define that.
exactly. Okay, so I'm skipping down to 206.
Could I back up just to? I know.
I
You
tried.
did.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
203 commercial.
Yes.
Would that include people building under 400 square foot or whatever our minimum is and renting those out as dwellings for profit? They have a web page, they're renting things out, they're building as many things as they can. They have their 2 RV spots and those are leased out through their website. Is that a commercial endeavor?
No.
It says connected with commerce.
So I'm going to verify this commercial with Title 12 because it has a definition of commercial as well.
Well,
But
and
the rationale is that those structures are permitted as a residential use, and renting them either short-term or long-term is a right given under state statute for every residential use. So I know, like, intuitively, it makes sense if you're renting your house out short-term, that it feels like a commercial use. State statute says specifically that's a residential use. So we can't define it a different direction.
That's state statute.
because then this has to be wrong because it says done or operating primarily for profit.
Correct.
Yep.
That's
So
my,
I'm going to verify this against Title 12. But that specific carve-out is part of the bundle of rights that every property owner has, is to rent it out either long-term or short-term.
Well, does the right to rent it out remove the obligation to follow commercial guidelines, though? Because that's where causes a
you're talking
question.
public safety and everything else, and you're using your property for commercial purposes. You have members of the public coming into your private property.
I kind of think it deserves some review because it is operated primarily for profit, and we've talked a lot about how the commercial versus residential has different requirements. Requiring people to follow that in order to exercise the right given by state statute doesn't seem like it's mutually exclusive. And so because that building is being used primarily for profit in the example Commissioner Korn gave, feels like it is that. While,
This, under LUPA, so 67, 65, 39, this is the regulation for short-term rentals. And this is the last line in the first paragraph. It says, a short-term rental or vacation rental shall be classified as a residential land use for zoning purposes, subject to all zoning requirements applicable thereto, which means you can't apply commercial standards to that specific use because it is a residential use. You have to treat it like you do all other residential homes or dwellings.
so
just
then
have
do
a
we
hard
have to
time.
say with exception for that then in the definition of this?
We could add something unless otherwise prohibited or
Yeah.
something along those lines so that we have like a catch-all.
Yep. What was the letter what's your next letter, Corn?
I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around why, if I build an ADU on my property specifically for the use of renting it out, not residential purposes, but I'm going to rent it out. I have a website created for taking all the bookings and taking the money. I also utilize the county's 2 RV spots and have separate power meters on those, and I am renting and leasing those out. How that doesn't come under a commercial endeavor? And we're sitting here talking about health and safety of residential property, which I don't really think that the government has a lot of say of how we protect yourself from yourself. But I think that we do have an obligation to protect others from renters, or not renters, but like the scenario I'm using. I understand if I have a place of residence, I have a house downtown Sandpoint, and I want to rent that out, I can understand that. But when I'm building things specifically to rent out, what makes that any different than a hotel or a bed and breakfast or any other thing that would require commercial guidelines?
Because state statute says that
Because state statute
it's a
says.
residential use. So you're talking short-term rental, not long-term rental, correct?
Either. What's the key need
Long-term
from doing
rental is-
long-term rentals?
Long-term rental is both of these are part of your bundles of rights as a citizen of the state. That when you own some property and you build a residential structure, that you could rent it out either short-term or long-term. And the defining factor there is the 30 days or less or more. So now, with the caveat on the RV side, and we're kind of straying from
We are.
this discussion a little bit, so I'll try to keep this brief. On the the RV dwelling unit side, I think, given that that's not protected under state statute of any fashion, that's strictly an allowance in our code for property owners, we could disallow specific uses from happening inside those RV dwelling units. So if you wanted to disallow short-term rentals and say that's going to be long-term only and here's why, right? We see that as a solution to housing, and we don't want to see those used for short durations, we could add that as a prohibition, so.
All right.
Does that help?
Yeah,
As far as ADUs and single-family dwellings, I don't think we have the latitude to do that.
I mean, I can see where somebody that just wants to use their land to make as much money as they can, they build a bunch of accessory dwellings now that they don't need BOPs, right? There's no plumbing in it or anything else, and some people don't require plumbing. They're just happy to have a roof over their head, and a place to sleep, and a place to use a one burner thing, not having a stove in there, so it's not a kitchen. And they're leasing these out. Now, do we as the county have an obligation to those people that are being forced into those situations to provide some kind of safety standards for them? But that, we're totally off topic now.
Yep, yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to revamp and touch again on the short-term rental code, I say we have a separate meeting regarding that, because that's kind of where all your questions are going, Commissioner.
Okay.
Yeah. Can we move on to 105, 106? Okay, take the silence as agreement, yeah?
Almost.
Just wait,
All right.
you gotta give pause, we're getting close to noon. Gotta give.
205, excavation, mechanical removal or more than 50 cubic yards of rock, natural soil or fill in any configuration. So could you just briefly tell me where the excavation comes into our Title 11 at?
I don't know why it's in here. That's a Title 12 environmental standards again. That talks about grading erosion control, so.
So if it's not in Title 11, can we just strike it?
So I'll highlight it for review to make sure it's not anywhere else found in Title 11.
Okay.
And then if it's not, I'll just pull it out. Okay. So we're on 206. There's a bunch of floodplain stuff copied into this code. I don't know how accurate this is now, because that floodplain code has changed a few times. I recommend just striking it all together and say refer to Title 14 of this code. That way we're just never have to go back and modify this again, and people just go to Title 14 as the most up-to-date version. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. So kitchen, so if we move on to 211, so like, I think I mentioned this earlier, it's a room or interior space primarily used, intended, or designated to be for cooking or preparation of food. And this last sentence is the hang-up, and this is where we've had arguments with folks. The presence of a range or oven or utility connection suitable for a range or for servicing a range or oven shall normally be considered as establishing a kitchen. So the argument we've had is this is an outbuilding with some finished space in it. It doesn't contain a kitchen, therefore it's not a dwelling. You know, it's just my gym, and my gym has a bathroom, right?
And an office.
And an office. What we don't want to do is prohibit altogether, because you do want like shops with a bathroom in it, or a sink so you can, clean your deer you just got, right? So we don't want to go so heavy-handed that we restrict no plumbing in any outbuilding, but then you also want to prevent people from building dwellings without getting them permitted as dwellings and have, potentially have people living in them or whatnot. So I don't know. This is more of a point of discussion. I don't have a proposed change here. It's just be aware that this is where it's at and some of the frustration kind of we've had with it.
So a kitchen, I would think, in order to be a safe kitchen,
Yeah.
should have running water in it. It should have a sink,
Yep.
not just an oven. I mean, so I could have an oven and I'm using it to powder coat gun parts. Does that make it a kitchen?
Right.
I would think a kitchen would want to have a sink, plumbing,
Yeah, so
running
the
water.
whole idea of cooking and preparation of food, that usually includes a sink. But oftentimes folks want to know, well, what exactly is required? And the industry standard, when you look at even most cities and counties with building codes, is once it has an oven, it's considered a kitchen. Once it's a kitchen, it's considered a dwelling. So really, when you put an oven in a house, that's what makes it a house versus something not.
What
a
about
house.
an outdoor kitchen is a house then if you put an oven in it?
No, but it's attached to the house, right?
No.
Usually?
No.
Mine's
No?
not. It's, no,
I don't know.
so,
So when
Do
you go-
outdoor kitchens usually have ovens? They have stoves, maybe.
okay,
Ovens? Dutch
if
oven?
somebody built an outdoor kitchen and they used it specifically for food preparation, as in canning, where you do have an oven and things like that, and a refrigerator and cabinets, but it is a standalone item as an outdoor kitchen on purpose for food processing. There,
a dwelling unit, it has three things. It has sanitation, sleeping, and food preparation.
okay, so if there's no sleeping, then it's
Exactly.
not, okay.
So an outdoor kitchen that's, just open, you're good, Commissioner, don't worry. An outdoor kitchen that's just that, like use it
She's
for
about to
canning or
go back
whatnot.
to her
Like,
office and just fly.
now, when you enclose it and then you do an addition and you do another addition, and now you have a bathroom and a bedroom and all that, that's
Not connected.
Yeah, okay.
It's just a standalone.
great.
There's a lot of people, and I say that because so as part of being a gleaner, there are a lot of people that actually have outdoor kitchens only for food processing.
Yep.
And there's nothing, but they have the stove, which doesn't make it, because it's where you bake and you prep other stuff. So,
I get that. Okay,
okay.
so moving on.
Lean-to is a complaint. Just go straight there. Did you pass, you didn't, we were out from kitchen.
I went right past it. So
Did you-
lean-to, a roofed shelter or structure that rests against the wall of another building. So let me just anticipate when it's required to get a permit or not. We're going to cover that in structure, in the definition of structure. But unless you have something else regarding that definition.
No, I will let you say something about why I'm taxed on a lean-to connected to my house, like
Oh,
it's extra.
tax, I
square footage.
have no idea.
No, I mean the understanding of lean-to.
Okay, anything else in, we should, see, manufactured building or structure.
Yeah,
We should probably,
I have a problem.
Use the words that we used earlier,
yeah.
and that would fix it.
okay, I'll highlight that for further.
Wait, go back up. It says manufactured home, a structure constructed, after. Okay, never mind, that's
After.
good.
I just saw
I was
that
like,
too.
wait a minute.
And mobile home,
There
we
we go.
define it separately, and that's the one prior to, so you have that
Good.
cutoff date, and I think that comes right out of state statute. Okay, if you guys are, the board's amenable, I'd like to move forward all the way to, I don't know why we define, so this is in 219, I don't know why we define servicing utility. We don't use it anywhere in the code. That's one I verified, it doesn't make sense. Small structure we'll have to update with the new changes there, Katie.
Yeah.
Start of construction, I think we mentioned this a couple of times. I believe Commissioner Corden wanted to potentially make some changes to it. The installation or placement of a slab, footing, piles, blocks, columns, posts, or manufactured or prefabricated structure or similar construction activities on site. The definition shall not include site clearing, excavation, or placement of concrete forms. So that's just the forms for the concrete, not saying they're not poured. So, questions, comments on that?
So I think going back to our prior conversation about whether or not permits should expire, in my mind, this makes a lot of sense from the perspective of general things like clearing and pad prep, excavation, and even placing forms. Those are, in general, that's not considered to be permanent or a significant investment toward the construction. But once they've actually poured concrete, they have made a significant investment and they have located the structure. And at that point, I think in my mind, they've locked in the intent of the permit and the code that was applicable at the time to say this is the size and location, because we've now proceeded with making a significant investment into siting this structure in this exact location.
We do get a lot of questions about installing their septic tank
Utilities.
Yeah, and utilities. And we get asked often if that could be start of their construction.
That's a good point when it comes to utility infrastructure. Um, that that was located in a part of determining the location of the building. So that does seem reasonable to me.
I kind of think that the actual building itself is the start of the building location permit because we're not permitting the placement of the septic. And that way, because in part, in doing very long construction in Idaho, sending the photograph of the progress, it's not of that aspect, it's of the actual structure that was turned into planning. And I think that's the communication that I actually received from whichever department called about, show me something on the building that's different than the last time. It wasn't show me that, they dropped the line for electrical because we don't permit anything related to that. That's just a necessary function that is independent of the building location permit. So I kind of think that the start of your building is the actual structure, not the,
I'm fine with it the way it's worded.
Yeah, I see your point, Commissioner Williams. It's because you're right. I wasn't thinking about the fact that, like with the septic, that infrastructure is being permitted by a different entity. And that you're right, that's not covered by the BLP. So I think you're correct. It should be specific to the BLP, in which case I think this language makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. You guys all agreed, so we'll stop talking about it. Moving on to.
Can I just say one thing?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Deja vu from yesterday. Did we do anything with small structure on the definitions? Are we striking that?
We're gonna revise it and make it cohesive with how you guys
Okay.
want changes to the
I
other
was
side.
behind, I guess, when we went past that.
you got like 18 minutes of focus until noon.
So structure. You wanna take lead on this one? So we have some proposed changes. Why do we remove? I don't remember why we struck that
I
part
don't
out.
remember either.
I don't recall.
Following
I don't know if we
exemptions.
should. We'll make that jive with how the new small structure side is gonna work.
Are we striking A, or are you going to reword A to fit everything else that we've been talking about?
So these are for exempt structures.
Exempt?
Yes,
so
they
these-
aren't exempt from Title 12 standards, but they are exempt from a building location permit.
Okay. Can we entertain the idea of raising the square feet on A, which is at
Yeah.
400 square feet right now? I would like to see 900, a 30 by 30 building, such as a hay storage barn or something like that.
Didn't we address the 1,080 square foot already on small structure though? So
Yes.
wouldn't that actually address this one?
Well, he's on A. So when you're talking about the exemptions below are subject, so this is under structure.
Can you get me to where you're talking about? Because I'm on small structures.
No, we're down
Oh.
on structures.
We're down on
And
structure.
the exemptions underneath structures.
Right, so when you're talking about this one, doesn't it get fixed
we're
when
down.
you address this one? Because you have to make the structure and small structure fit what we already talked about.
Yep. He's
we're-
asking,
we're
so
on A.
we're saying
Right.
what's required a permit. This is an exemption from what requires a permit. So right now, if you build a structure that's 400 square feet or less, and you meet the certain criteria here, you don't need a permit at all. Versus you need to get a small structure permit right now, and I think we're talking about that to residential accessory dwelling permit, or accessory structure permit. So this is, I have a shop, or I have a lean-to for storing wood, I have a prefab, shed, 400 square feet or less, doesn't require a permit. So Commissioner Corn wants to increase that number to something larger.
And I'm proposing like 900, just because it goes back to that 1,080 or whatever. It's like a 30 by 30 shed would be 900 square feet.
The typical, you see in most municipalities and counties, is 200 square feet. So we changed it to 400, I want to say 2 years
2 years
ago.
ago, yeah.
To give some lenience, because you're sending out violation letters for chicken coops that are 260 square feet. It just seemed kind of a no-brainer. And given you have a lot of folks that want to put in a bunch of smaller structures, so we increase it from 200 to 400. So just a little bit of history on how this was
I
corrected.
kind of don't agree on this one because we made the argument earlier that the reason we were not changing that letter was so that Panhandle Health could do the, can you put it over this kind of stuff? And anything larger than that, the footprint, I think, means that we need to make sure that it's being placed appropriately. And on this particular size, it's reasonable, but I think larger is where you are in the, we need to sign off on that. And we don't have a lot of regulations, but I think greater than 400, I think is a little bit too big. And you don't want to bump up against that size where you can build your additional, I think once you build your family home, it was like you can build an additional 900 square foot place.
Yeah,
I think,
ADU, yeah.
I don't think you make this one greater than that, because then that would mean that that didn't need, potentially falls through the cracks because of the size.
Yeah, we wouldn't catch them. So this does require like no sewage disposal. It does require, what else we got here? That seems redundant, 3 and 1. Anyways,
So one of the things, the reason I think most other municipalities have 200 square feet as a maximum is because typically what that means is it's dealing with the types of structures like chicken coops, storage sheds, greenhouses that typically they're not permanent. They don't have a foundation or a footing or a slab. They're usually just, some type of wood frame or even metal frame construction that sits on skids or just rests directly on grade and doesn't have any type of a foundation to it. And so it's not something that's permanent. And so these other impacts with things like septic systems and things are less concerning because you're not digging into the ground to install them and they can be readily moved if necessary. So I do think that the fact that we're 400 square feet is starting to push into more permanent type structures where other concerns might typically need to be looked at and addressed. So I do agree that going above 400 square feet could become problematic.
okay. So we have an addition here to add decks onto B. So no addition. So something exempt is an addition to an existing residential accessory structure used solely for storage of, and it has all those things, and then decks. That has been problematic for some folks because they want to put a 400 square foot deck and it's attached to their home and they're required to get a permit for it.
Yes, I was.
Yes. So I think this comes up pretty often.
Yeah.
So adding that as an exception would be, I think, beneficial for a lot of folks. And then you
Definitely.
go on to C, and this adds a lot more lenience because what we have proposed here is an open and unenclosed addition to a permitted residential dwelling unit, such as a lean-to or deck, provided the addition has these three things. Is an addition that has a total floor area of not exceeding 400 square feet, has no sewage disposal utilities, and does not cause the structure accepted by this title to exceed. See, I think we need to remove 3. That's wrong. So I think it's 2 and 3. We copied it from the one before it. So what that says is you can build a front porch, you can build a back porch, you can have a cover over the top of it, open and unenclosed. You're not adding living space, you're adding like a deck or patio or something along those lines. So,
Do we have to include now the word tiny homes on D when we're talking about do we have to specifically change that, or do you think that pulls that word in?
we could redefine,
Because that language specifically sometimes people scan for.
for manufactured, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it adds manufactured structures and mobile homes placed on the temporary lots. Do we have to include the tiny? It's on D. underneath the agricultural structures design. Right below it.
Oh,
Does that, I'm not sure, it's a
Oh.
new,
Yeah,
so
we could.
that's saying that manufactured homes and mobile homes, I see what you're saying,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Makes sense.
We can update manufactured homes to include tiny, we can take a look at the definition.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just saying that if you have it on a commercial lot,
Retail lot.
your retail lot, you're selling.
right,
it, then-
like we have now a retail tiny home lot in Blanchard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's legal, I just know that it's there. But I know the word tiny home is used more,
Yeah. It's palatable today versus
Yeah.
manufactured home.
and I don't know if there's actually a difference because they're on those movable, but you can drop them on a foundation or whatever, I don't know.
Okay. Any concerns about this change to open and unenclosed additions?
Where are we at?
This is
Going back
under
up. Oh, C there?
C.
3C.
Yeah, it's the proposed C.
So we're going to make that exempt?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what we're proposing here is decks even with a covering over the top. Now, when people enclose them, I think that goes into the lines of an addition to their house, and I think we need to get PhD involved so that their septic system needs to be resized so they can require them then.
When you talk about enclosing a deck, though, I kind of don't get, so we have some where people have their deck and they actually just put up walls and screens so that there's no bugs. Why does PhD need to get involved if that's
I'm
what?
talking about like you have a
in.
foundation, you have walls, windows, and heated, it's becoming part of the house and living space.
So is enclosed the right word then? Because enclosed decks, when I hear it, it's I'm keeping the bugs out.
Sure.
Not that there's, additional living area on the deck, but that it is just enclosed.
Look into
Converted.
that.
Converted.
And maybe we need to indicate that it's non-habitable because, if it's not heated and insulated, then it's not intended to be habitable space.
Define habitable space. I think I have the intent there, and let me see if
Okay.
I can craft the language.
So if we have like a Trex deck and I want to enclose it and put a jacuzzi out there, right? I'm not going to use a Trex deck for flooring because I got cold air coming up into my house. So it's not living space, but yet it's an enclosed deck.
I think that would be hard to regulate.
No, I think you're right, Commissioner. That's the point I think we need to find a way to verbally indicate the difference between habitable space and, this type of accessory space that's not intended for habitation.
Right.
Okay. I'll rework those. We are moving down, we've moved. Section that is that?
Platforms, walks.
I see you removed F,
Yeah,
and why is that?
Because we don't regulate this anyways.
well, this
Platforms,
is
walks,
exempt
and
from, I think we've moved.
Oh,
it.
I think we moved it to title or
Yeah, we moved it down
that's
to
right.
not exempt from Title 12. So there's two different sections. Here,
we
which
just don't
is,
regulate the setback part of it.
yeah,
So
Because there are-
walkways and stuff are going to be required to have a BOP?
No, this is
No.
exempt. This
So
would be exempt from it.
we're moving it to the next section down. We'll get to that here in a second.
Okay.
But when looking at these other ones, re-roofing, the way it's written now is not affecting the structural roof framing. And I don't think we need to, I don't think we've never utilized this. If someone wants to add a dormer to their house, we don't require a building location permit. I don't think it's something we need to try to regulate.
That's really,
Doesn't-
Some of this is beyond the BOP, is what he's trying to capture there. Yep.
Commissioner Domke, do you have something?
No, I'm just trying to reiterate that, yeah, if a renovation doesn't expand the number of bedrooms or, the load on the septic system, things of that nature, then I think we should be leaving it alone.
I might be scanning down farther, but why are we regulating the height of fences?
And it's highlighted for a reason, so I wanted that to be a discussion point. So swimming pools, water tanks. So this is one we talked about, which is, should water tanks should water tanks be required to meet setbacks? Right now, water tanks not exceeding 5,000 gallons are not required to meet setbacks. So
No, they are required.
Oh, sorry, they are required to meet setbacks. But I think we have an exception for is it propane tanks?
Yeah, propane tanks don't have to meet setbacks, and how is water more
Dangerous.
than propane?
It's
So
not.
that's-
You need BLPs for propane tanks?
No.
If it's over the
Yeah.
so many gallons, but I don't know if because the location.
Yeah, I think we need setbacks for propane tanks because they are absolutely a hazard. If they're set right on the property line, we could definitely be causing a problem for our neighbor.
Exception. Is it in
It's
Title 12?
below that.
Oh, okay.
It's just the Title 12 exception. It's right
Yeah,
there.
residential propane tanks not exceeding 1,000 gallons.
So we're still, this section that we're working on is exempt
From
from
building location,
BLPs?
yes.
Okay.
So that's exceptions for building location permit requirements. Where did we get solar panels? Did we move
Oh,
that?
I've been
Are we
asked-
skipping past what the line is? Am I not following? Because we're on,
Are you want to
Oh.
go back up to water tanks?
no, I don't want to go back up at all. I want to keep going down, but people keep saying words that aren't on here.
Yeah.
Are we wanting to add words in? Is that what's happening?
There's a few of these that were for discussion. So one, water tanks, should they be exempt from a building location permit if they are at 5,000 gallons or more or less? There's some rationale that if you're going to get over 5,000 gallons, that the potential impact if it were to fail could hit your neighbors or whatnot. So we have very few of these more than 5,000 gallon water tanks.
I would never have thought to come for a building location permit for a water tank to begin with.
And that's probably why we don't hear about them, because they don't ask.
Why would we need a?
I don't.
It's because
Well,
it sounds like we're trying to capture something under building location permit when that's not, I don't think I'm the only one that wouldn't come for half of the stuff that's listed as exceptions to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what I'm reading it of. I wasn't
Well, in
asking.
my mind, yeah, go back to the structure size. I mean, if it's under 400 square feet. Now, unless we talk about special hazards, like a propane tank, in my mind.
But that's not a building.
No,
It's not
it's
a,
not a building, but it's well-defined structure, yeah.
You go back up to like the definition, not definition.
I
Definition of
think what we're
structure,
doing
it
is
says-
we're trying to, we're using building location permit here to try to address other issues and saying you need to ask us, but by definition of a building location permit, the things that we're saying, do you regulate or not regulate, it's not a building. And so why are we regulating things? That's not our, it's a different.
I see your point. I think what we should be looking at for these one-off types of items that are not BLP items are just that they don't require a BLP like we have earlier, but they do require conformance to Title 12, and we just need a special table for these supporting, this type, because it's basically, it's kind of utility infrastructure items. Water
Exactly.
tanks, propane tanks, and I think we just need a special table that says these are the setbacks for these types of items.
And I do think that's an important part also to educate our community on. Because I don't think that most people would think building location permit for these items. And so people shouldn't be in non-compliance for things that it doesn't meet the definition. I think if we built a table and put the items that were reasonable to require following setbacks in those and, called it your setback table, but not a building location permit. Can we do?
Yeah, I agree. It's not intuitive that my propane tank or my water tank are a building.
Right, but we do permit fuel tanks for gas stations and their location
Under what? A building location permit? It's not a, so,
So I'm
In
wondering
the
if we-
definition
Yeah,
of
it should have a different title.
there.
Yeah, it should be titled as a different type of permit.
and I think that we're trying to construe it out to make it work, and I think instead just make it its own table and then educate that there's a setback table for the county and that people need to be in compliance with that in addition to the building location permit. Not,
So, right now, Title 11 is labeled building regulation. Chapter 1 is building location permit. What I think you could do is add a second chapter that doesn't call it a building location permit, but some other type of permit, right? Whether you want to have that just in definitions or its own standards of review or something along those lines. Let's see if we can craft something. If you don't want it to be a permit per se, but just have the guidelines that need to be followed, that's fine as well. But I think it makes, now that you guys mentioned this, it makes a lot of sense to carve all these things out because it does muddy up what is a building and what is a structure versus what's not really. These are the utility items, right? So
and I don't want to grow government by saying we're managing your buildings, we're managing like the three
water
different.
tanks.
I don't, I mean, but I do think the community does, because even though it's a water tank, part of the reason of being mindful of the setbacks is mindful of your neighbor having to see the garbage on your property. And that's so, and then also I understand saying a propane tank needs to be farther away, but that's not, I think that this plan will fix kind of some of the issues.
But I think the way we define structures at the beginning is an assembly of materials. So that it's so vague that as soon as you start assembling something,
That could be a fence.
It
that
could be a car.
fence, it could be a car, it could be a
It's
desk.
everything.
Right, it's so vague,
big table.
and to try
Yeah.
to capture anything you could. That some of the rationale behind a tank, take a subdivision that is required to put in a fire suppression or a fire tank, right? For just specific for fire, and that's like 15 or 20,000 gallons. If that tank were to fail, right, or let's say you put it too close or too far away or too close to a road or a setback or whatnot, it's really similar in size to any other structure. So it kind of makes intuitive sense. We want to know on the ground and then have normal review from the other agencies and whatnot of that location of that tank. So that gives us the ability to say you're required to get a permit for placing that tank. So
Well, that tank usually, and we're going down a rabbit hole again, I think, but that tank's gonna be underground.
it doesn't have to
Not
be.
always.
How's it
Not
gonna,
always.
how are you gonna keep it liquid in the wintertime?
Heating
20,000 gallons?
A heating
You
element.
don't, you don't have to.
You keep it
You don't
moving.
have to.
You don't,
Well, you
no,
know when
there's-
most fires happen?
It-
In the
no,
wintertime,
It doesn't
heaters
matter,
and
none of that
stoves.
matters. It's that you don't have to, and the people will put heating elements in those.
Heating elements.
You
keep
you
it
can buy
moving
them
too.
at North 40.
For 20,000 gallon tank,
Listen,
multiple heating units, 220 out there.
it doesn't matter that you wouldn't do it, it's available to be done. So we're gonna do a separate table, so what's the next word?
Okay, so the next one is
So-
adding solar
so-
panels, free.
Time out. Sorry, man.
So close.
I thought
I
you
know.
talked to him.
I'm just still hung up on F. Why is it F exempted?
Platforms?
Oh, we're getting there.
It's moved to the next section.
Okay, I'll wait there.
So we're adding the very end of this, what's exempt from getting permits, solar panels freestanding or attached to a structure.
This is something that has been coming up since I started working as permit tech. They would call companies, solar panel companies would call and ask if they needed a building location permit. And it really is, I guess, as a definite, it would meet the definition of a structure. But should we be regulating solar panels?
I know Southern Idaho,
So-
they deal with these a lot more often, especially the freestanding, and they're like solar farms, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of a heads up.
But that
I
would
don't
be-
think it's something we're gonna see.
Would they
We'll
need
get
a
enough
conditional use permit for that?
I think it's
though?
not a building, I think it goes in the same other table of the idea of the setback from your property line.
Okay.
But it's
Yeah, I
not,
think it's the utility table, and we do have to consider a setback, because if when you have one of those set for low winter sun angle, and if you put it right up against the property line and your neighbor's house is 50 feet away, you will be destroying them with glare off of those panels.
Commissioner Donkey, you'll actually be helping with their heating cost.
So
That's possible. That is possible. They can pick up your reflected sunlight.
I think things like solar panels are not buildings and they go in a different section. I think there's a difference of someone putting in a solar farm that would come to the county, but resident.
That would become a commercial use at some point.
Yeah, it falls under a utility, yeah, anyways. So the next section here under structure is the exceptions below are subject to land use standards in Title 12.
Wait, we skipped fences.
No, not yet.
That's in this section, Commissioner. So I'm just reading the part.
I'm online, and so fences are below that one. Okay,
Really?
yeah,
Does yours look like that?
no,
So this is,
it's okay. I can slide
you
back
can
up.
follow, huh?
Yeah, I can follow along. That's where I'm looking up at yours and looking on mine.
Oh,
Go ahead.
so the exceptions below are subject to the land use standards in Title 12. However, they are not subject to setback standards specified in Title 12, Chapter 4 of this code. So I think intuitively, we all understand that fences should not be required to meet any kind of setback. That's just, it makes sense. You're putting it on a property line.
I thought, just on that, I thought that you had to be on your side of the property line or something.
Right, yes.
Okay,
But you don't need to be 5 feet back.
no.
So I think that makes intuitive sense.
The only argument in the past has been, how do you maintain the other side of the fence? If it's a wood fence or something and you need to go over and stain it or paint it, but
They can set it back 5 feet if they like.
if they like, yeah.
Or they can make friends with their neighbors.
Yep.
The 5 feet is easier. What about, so you're gonna get rid of it altogether?
No, I just have it highlighted as a discussion
Well,
point.
I don't see how we can regulate even the height. That doesn't make, it's kind of like the other one where you said the height of the building, we don't regulate the air. I think
Well, but
that,
if you don't have any setback, you could be visually obstructing your neighbor's view.
If you have no height requirement, is that what you're saying?
Well, and if you have no setback
Oh,
and no height right? Because if you can build right at the property line as high as you want, I can put up a 20-foot fence and obstruct my neighbor's view to the mountains.
The other idea is when it falls down, right?
Yeah.
The first wind.
but that's not for us. Court is for, but how do
Yes.
we tell somebody what the size of their fence can be? Most people don't even build fences that are high, but I just don't see why we are saying 9 feet
8 feet.
or 8 feet.
But I guess my perspective would be, if it is solid, if it can visually obstruct, then 8 feet is reasonable to me. And when you get into any kind of livestock or agricultural type of fence, there's no reason anyone's going to build anything more than 8 feet in height. And when it's livestock related, you have visibility through it.
I don't actually agree because the deer jump over our fences and that you end up making them higher to address that. Because the idea of visually
Not
blocking your
solid.
neighbor doesn't really matter because I can build a house that blocks your view on my property. Where does the county,
Not on the property line, you can't.
where does
You
the
can park
county,
your RV there.
where does the county have the right to say how tall my fence can be on my property? That's what I'm asking. And I don't see the rationale for saying the county can tell me how high my fence can be. So
View shed is a part of property value.
it's still my property and blocking my view of your garbage is also part of, sometimes that's part of the reason you go up. So I just don't see, it doesn't matter about the value. I don't disagree with what you're saying. What I'm saying is, who are we to regulate the height of somebody's fence?
Yeah, I'm not in support of regulating it either.
It's been on there for some time. I highlighted it just to have this discussion. I don't have a position one way or the other, but I thought you guys might, so.
I don't think, go ahead, Katie.
I also want to let you know, after the 8 feet, they have to meet setbacks and get a building location permit.
It's not a building.
So that's just another topic that you guys can discuss. Because I don't know.
I agree with that perspective, with that approach. If it's not a building location permit, but we get into that other type of use table, I think that is important when you get above 8 feet.
That I have to come in and pay for,
I don't know how much it is off the top of my head.
I'm not agreeing with the need for a permit. I'm saying to have that other use table that deals with setbacks for utility type or,
I think you could say your table that said, if you're going beyond, I think the setback is reasonable. I don't think your height is reasonable, because setback is intended to address the property line. But the idea of height, I don't care how high you go.
Oh, well, right, they can go higher as long as they're meeting their setback.
That's what I thought I said at the beginning.
That's why I'm saying put in that table, but not that we say we're going to require them to buy a building location permit
Oh,
and get our
yeah, that's
permission
fine.
for that. I don't want to
No, I
regulate.
agree with that.
Whatever you guys.
Okay, so next one.
So, let me just recap that real quick. So, you guys want no height limitation, but there is some height limit as to what requires a setback and what doesn't,
I think that's reasonable.
but no
I
permit
agree.
for a fence.
No
at all.
payment for a fence.
And do you all agree that 8 foot is the right number for what requires a setback?
So we had to do 12 feet for deer jumping. And then the 8 feet, it's not tall when you have an orchard. And so it's
That would be my only concern too.
not, 8 feet is not tall at all. I don't
I
know.
would just add I would add the term, I would say if it's solid. You're not going to build a solid fence typically to deal with wildlife.
Well, I guess we're not typical because we
And then you
did.
don't have the visual obstruction issue.
Visual obstruction, though, is desirability. I understand that, but that's not on my property. It doesn't matter.
And 12 feet, I think 12 feet would be, I think that'd be a good number because again, I could say, well, I can park my RV on my property line, which is 12 feet tall and block your view and you can't do anything about that either.
So let me give you another example. You build a 12-foot tall solid fence right on the property line. My property is north of yours. I have, 24 prize-winning roses planted just over the property line on my property. Your 12-foot tall solid fence now shades my plants and kills them.
That's not government's job there,
Not
in
my
my
job.
opinion.
That's.
Move your plants.
Yeah.
No, don't build your solid fence 12 feet tall.
No, I'm not going to agree with you that I've got to give you sun for your roses on my property. It's you, that's your choice. That's how we choose where to build. I don't think my county is
That's what
responsible.
setbacks are for.
I'm sorry, what?
That's what setbacks are for.
Yeah. I'm going to go with 12 feet. What's your comment?
I agree.
All right, well, you guys outvoted me. I think it's ridiculous, but let's move on.
Fair enough. Okay, I've got my notes there. The next thing is on retaining walls. So right now, if anything over 4 feet measured at grade requires to get a permit
And meet setbacks.
and meet setbacks, which has been frustrating for lots of folks. The workaround that a lot of people have utilized is they'll do a 4 foot, they'll go a couple feet over, they'll go 4 feet, and so they'll just do this tiered approach. So 4 foot is a typical industry standard. When you get over 4 feet, usually you have to get engineered plans for building purposes. So I'm guessing that's where this number came from. We've never changed it. I don't think I've ever brought it up. But since we did a whole review of all this, I thought I'd bring it up to the board and see what you think.
And we don't require engineered drawings and a stamp for retaining walls over 4 feet anywhere but Schweitzer.
And that's a specific
Yeah,
provision
that-
of the
yeah.
Alpine Code.
And that's in Title 12.
I think that's a different table issue because it's not a building location permit addressing it there.
I agree with you, Commissioner. I will say, however, even at 4 feet, if you build right on the property line, you cannot build a retaining wall without over excavating and then having to backfill on both sides. So it's not possible practically from a construction perspective to build a retaining wall because a retaining wall has to have a footing. So you have to dig below grade and install a footing and then backfill. So anything that's retaining related cannot be built right on the property line.
I
This
would
is-
agree with that. I don't want to see a building location permit for it though.
I
Well,
agree with you.
some people build retaining walls with ecology blocks and they stack them.
Even
so-
though you have to start below grade if you don't want them to fall over.
Some people drop them in the ground and they're on that line, but I don't think it's a building location permit.
Okay.
I agree it's not, but it should have a setback, I believe.
So the one,
Because you're literally potentially creating a safety hazard on your neighbor's property, especially if they don't.
I don't
build it
disagree with
correctly.
the setback. That's why I started with, I think this one goes on that different kind of table.
Okay.
Okay.
So the most frustrating part people have is when they're putting in their driveway and they need to do some kind of retaining wall near the road, and then they're required to do a 25-foot setback to the road. So just kind of a heads up. We'll see if we can craft up some changes in this and present to you guys when we kind of.
I think they should have to do in that scenario that it's kind of, this is that kind of, we're trying to capture something as if it's not you're building a residence, but you're just building anything in the county regardless. Yep. And I don't think that's what a building location permit is. And I think if we segregate those things out, I think we'll fix it. And I think you guys are kind of understanding that kind of distinction between where we are in this table. Commissioner Donkey?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just thinking, Jake, I could offer that. I think if you and Spencer and I had a conversation, it'd be really valuable because, in my opinion, we don't need to look at large setbacks. We just need to establish setbacks based on the height of the wall, based on some general engineering and construction principles for retaining walls, just so that we're providing a safe situation and we're not encouraging people to do excavation on their neighbor's property.
Agreed. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. I think we already had a brief discussion on residential propane tanks, so I think moving that to the new section will be beneficial. I think the same idea applies for platforms, walkways, driveways, not more than 30 inches above grade.
So the new section, just to clarify, is setbacks but no permits. Is that
I think that's the idea, is to turn this into it's not really a structure. We're going to kind of redefine what structure is and call those more like what they are, which is, buildings. I'm going to have to mull this over for a little bit and try to, I think I understand your intent, but how to get that pen on paper, it's going to take a little bit of work. So, okay, any other questions on these two?
Is that it?
That's it. That's the last of it. So,
Good job.
Any further questions for planning from the board?
Nope.
All right.
None from me.
All right, it is 12:17 and this workshop is adjourned.
we have a hearing at 1:30.
Quick question on the hearing.
Yes.
So I just want to confirm, looks like we got a large packet yesterday afternoon from the applicant's attorney.
Yeah.
So,
We're going to address that first thing at the beginning of the hearing.
30-year watertight warranty.
Okay.
Coverage for all trim.
I just want to understand, right, the applicability of information coming in that time frame.
Yeah,
There was something
like I
about-
said, we'll cover it first thing, Brian, because
Right, right.
there's some concerns
We're
on
at
both from
but
Bill's point
that's
of
not
view
from
and
the
from
finish sheet, it's
the
from the
appellant's
contract.
attorney.
So I sent you guys.
Okay.
We have
Okay,
a-
I'd appreciate that. I'm trying to review it, but it's very challenging within the time frame that we have.
Yeah, exactly. So
And I don't see anything.
we'll likely
under 10
request to
here.
There was
continue that
nothing.
due to that
And so
late submission.
I
So we have a
argued with Bill
workaround
yesterday
and
over,
to
why are we
make
not
it fair
calling
for
these
everyone.
people
So
about this deal?
Absolutely.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
He was not very aggressive with, yes, let's do this. And I said, I don't see why we wouldn't. Veronica went back, she got a whole bunch of records. I don't see the why we don't have an option here. And I asked Bill, we need to have a conversation